An eerie silence comes first. A pause in the clatter of carriage wheels, a breath held beneath gaslight. Then the city exhales London, wrapped in fog and ambition, smelling of coal smoke, perfume, and damp velvet. Inside a grand townhouse, crystal glasses clink, laughter rises, a lady's pulse quickens, a gentleman feels invincible. On a silver tray, almost polite in its presentation, lies a thin line of white powder that promises brilliance without consequence. This is Victorian London at its most deceptive. Cocaine does not arrive as a street drug or a scandal. It arrives dressed as progress. Doctors hail it as a medical marvel. Newspapers praise its modernity. High society embraces it as a tool of refinement, something to sharpen wit, banish fatigue, and conquer weakness. In parlors and private clubs, beneath chandeliers and moral certainty, the powder flows freely. No needles, no smoke, no shame. Just confidence, energy, and the quiet belief that one is above collapse. But the ether-thin illusion does not last. Behind closed doors, brilliance turns to obsession. Confidence curdles into paranoia. Bodies waste away while reputations fracture, all hidden behind perfect posture and impeccable manners. What begins as a fashionable indulgence becomes a slow corruption of mind, body, and class itself. This is not the story of the desperate poor, it is the story of an empire poisoning itself in silk gloves. Before we step deeper into the fog, take a moment to subscribe and stay with me. These are the histories they never taught, stories of elegance, addiction, and decay hiding in plain sight. Now, let us enter Victorian London and uncover how cocaine became the powder that corrupted high society. The fog comes first. Not the gentle mist of postcards, but the heavy, clinging fog that settles into Victorian London like a held breath. It curls around gas lamps and iron railings, blurs the edges of grand townhouses, and seeps through cracks in brick and bone alike. Carriages roll past with muffled wheels, footsteps echo, then vanish. The city moves, but nothing feels fully awake. In this half-light, London appears composed, restrained, respectable, yet beneath its calm surface, something restless stirs. Inside the drawing rooms of the West End, warmth replaces the cold. Coal fires glow behind polished grates. Chandeliers scatter light across silk gowns and starched collars. Conversation flows easily, laughter carefully measured, each gesture refined through years of etiquette and expectation. These rooms are temples of control. Control of emotion, control of appetite, control of image. Victorian high society prides itself on mastery over the body, the mind, and the self. And it is here, amid velvet curtains and silver trays, that the promise appears. At first, it does not arrive as temptation. There is no sense of danger, no hint of decay. It comes instead, wrapped in science and confidence. A powder, pale and unassuming, praised in medical journals and whispered about with curiosity rather than fear. Doctors speak of it with enthusiasm. Chemists dispense it discreetly. It is said to sharpen thought, banish fatigue, steady trembling nerves. In an age exhausted by its own progress, such claims feel not only appealing, but necessary. The Victorian world is tired. Industry roars day and night. Cities swell beyond recognition. Men are expected to work harder, think faster, achieve more. Women are expected to endure tight corsets, rigid manners, endless social performance without complaint or visible strain. Weakness is a moral failure. Rest is indulgence. To falter is to fall behind. And so when a substance appears that promises energy without vulgarity, stimulation without scandal, it slips easily into the cracks of polite life. Unlike opium, it carries no smoke. Unlike alcohol, it leaves no smell on the breath. It does not loosen the tongue into vulgarity or send the body slumping into stupor. Instead, it lifts. It brightens the eyes. It quickens speech. It convinces the user quietly, persuasively, that they are at their best, more alert, more charming, more capable. It feels, to many, like self-improvement distilled into powder. Servants notice small changes first. A mistress who sleeps less, yet rises energized. A gentleman whose temper sharpens even as his confidence swells. Late nights stretch longer, meals grow smaller. Letters are written at frantic speed, words tumbling over one another with unnatural urgency. But nothing appears openly wrong. Appearances, after all, are everything. In public, these men and women remain paragons of Victorian virtue. They attend church, they host dinners, they speak earnestly of morality, restraint, and national greatness. Privately, the powder becomes a companion, first occasional, then familiar, then quietly indispensable. A pinch before an evening engagement, a discreet dose before an important meeting. A solution to fatigue, melancholy, and the creeping sense that modern life is moving faster than the human body was ever meant to endure. What makes this moment dangerous is not ignorance, but certainty. Cocaine, though it is not yet widely feared by that name, is believed to be understood, measured, controlled. It is a triumph of chemistry, a testament to the Victorian faith that science, once unleashed, can be neatly governed by reason and discipline. Few consider the possibility that the substance might govern them in return. Outside, the fog thickens. It presses against windows, blurring reflections in the glass. Inside, laughter continues, bright and effortless. No one notices the subtle shift taking place, the way ambition is beginning to outrun caution, the way dependence hides comfortably behind respectability. The powder has not yet revealed its cost. For now, it remains a promise, and London, convinced of its own mastery, accepts it without hesitation. The 19th century does not creep forward. It charges. Steam hisses from engines, factory whistles pierce the dawn, and iron rails stretch across the countryside like veins carrying momentum itself. Victorian Britain lives with the constant sensation of acceleration, of a world no longer content to move at a human pace. Progress is not merely admired, it is worshipped. London stands at the center of this faith. It is the capital of an empire that believes it has mastered time, distance, and nature through discipline and intellect. Telegraph wires hum with instant communication. Trains compress days into hours. New machines promise efficiency where once there was exhaustion. Every innovation reinforces the same quiet assumption. Limits exist only to be conquered. Yet this triumph comes at a cost the Victorians are reluctant to name. The human body, unlike steel and steam, does not easily adapt. Minds fray under constant stimulation, nerves tremble, sleep becomes shallow and irregular. Physicians begin to speak of nervous exhaustion, a modern affliction born not of poverty, but of success. It affects clerks, scholars, socialites, those most entangled in the machinery of progress. The empire demands constant alertness, constant composure, constant output, and it offers little mercy to those who cannot keep pace. To admit fatigue is to confess weakness. To rest too openly is to risk irrelevance. Victorian society rewards endurance above all else, and it is precisely this expectation that makes chemical assistance so appealing. If science can conquer disease, why should it not conquer tiredness? If chemistry can illuminate streets and power engines, why should it not sharpen the mind and steady the nerves? Medical culture reinforces this belief. Doctors are no longer mere comforters of the sick, they are guardians of modernity. Journals brim with reports of new compounds, new treatments, new theories that promise mastery over the unruly human system. Pain is to be managed, mood is to be regulated, productivity is to be restored. Within this framework, a substance that stimulates without obvious harm feels not dangerous, but inevitable. Cocaine enters this world as a solution aligned perfectly with Victorian values. It does not challenge restraint, it appears to enhance it. It does not encourage indulgence, it promises control. Where alcohol blurs judgment, cocaine sharpens it. Where opium dulls the senses, cocaine awakens them. It seems tailored for an age that prizes clarity, discipline, and ambition above all else. This obsession with progress extends beyond medicine and into morality itself. Victorians believe they are not only advancing technologically, but ethically. They see their era as cleaner, more rational, more enlightened than those that came before. Superstition is replaced by science. Excess is replaced by refinement. Public behavior is carefully regulated, bodies tightly clothed, emotions carefully contained. In such a world, addiction is imagined as something crude, something belonging to the lower classes or to earlier, less civilized times. That belief becomes a fatal blind spot. Because cocaine arrives wearing the uniform of progress, it is welcomed rather than questioned. It fits seamlessly into the Victorian narrative of improvement. A tired mind is not failing, it is simply under-supported. A restless body is not protesting, it merely requires chemical adjustment. Each dose feels like participation in the grand forward march of modernity. Yet beneath the rhetoric of advancement lies a deeper anxiety. The pace of life has accelerated faster than meaning itself. Faith wavers. Traditional certainties strain under industrial noise and urban anonymity. The empire expands, but the individual often feels smaller, more replaceable, more exhausted. Cocaine does not merely energize, it reassures. It whispers that one can keep up, that one can remain exceptional in an age that devours the ordinary. The tragedy is not that Victorians sought relief, it is that they mistook stimulation for strength. In their devotion to progress, they overlooked the simplest truth. Not every limit is meant to be broken. Some exist to protect the body from the very ambitions the mind invents. As London surges forward, its citizens lean ever more heavily on the tools that promise mastery over fatigue and fear. The empire glows brighter, louder, faster, and somewhere within that brilliance, the first cracks quietly begin to form, thin as lines of white powder, barely visible against polished marble and confident smiles. It begins far from London, not in drawing rooms or laboratories, but high in the thin air of the Andes, where the land rises sharply and the body struggles for breath. For centuries, indigenous peoples have chewed the bitter leaves of the coca plant to steady themselves against altitude, hunger, and exhaustion. The leaves are modest, unremarkable in appearance, folded carefully into the cheek during long days of labor. There is no glamour here, no illusion of mastery, only survival. To the British Empire, however, distance transforms meaning. As Victorian explorers, botanists, and traders push deeper into South America, they encounter coca not as a cultural practice, but as a curiosity, a plant that seems to grant endurance without collapse. In an age obsessed with extraction, coca is quickly stripped of its context. Its ritual is ignored, its restraint discarded. What matters is not how it has been used, but what it might become. Samples cross oceans in sealed crates. Leaves dry and crumble during the long voyage to Europe, but their promise survives intact. Chemists begin to isolate the plant's active principle, refining it, purifying it, concentrating its effects into a form far more potent than anything known to the people who first cultivated it. The result is cocaine, clean, white, precise, a substance shaped by empire, transformed by industry. This refinement is celebrated as triumph. Victorian science prides itself on improvement, on taking what is raw and making it efficient, powerful, controlled. The coca leaf, once bound to land and tradition, is now liberated into powder, freed from geography and culture alike. It can be measured, bottled, sold. It can be standardized. It can be owned. The journey from mountain leaf to laboratory compound mirrors the larger imperial project. Resources flow inward from distant territories toward London, where they are reshaped, rebranded, and redistributed as symbols of progress. Sugar, tea, rubber, quinine all follow similar paths. Cocaine simply joins this procession, another substance absorbed into the bloodstream of empire. What no one pauses to consider is how profoundly different the refined product is from its origin. Chewed slowly, coca offers mild stimulation balanced by ritual and limitation. Isolated and ingested as cocaine, it strikes the nervous system with force and speed. The restraint once imposed by culture is gone, replaced by Victorian confidence in self-control. The powder, unlike the leaf, demands nothing of tradition or moderation. It invites repetition. It rewards excess. In London, its foreign origin adds to its allure. Cocaine is exotic without being threatening, distant without being unfamiliar. It arrives cloaked in scientific language rather than superstition. Doctors speak of alkaloids and measured doses, not of rituals or spirits. To Victorian sensibilities, this distinction matters deeply. A substance framed as chemistry belongs to the modern world. A substance tied to ancient custom does not. High society finds comfort in this framing. Cocaine is not associated with poverty, vice, or the streets. It is associated with laboratories, lectures, and colonial discovery. It carries the quiet prestige of empire, proof that Britain can extract value even from the most remote corners of the world. To partake in it feels not indulgent, but informed, educated, advanced. And yet, something essential has already been lost in translation. The coca leaf was never meant to be consumed in isolation from its limits. It was never intended to fuel endless productivity or sharpen social performance deep into the night. Those boundaries were understood instinctively by the cultures that lived with the plant. Victorian Britain, intoxicated by its own ingenuity, assumes it can replace those boundaries with discipline alone. The white powder settles easily into its new home. It passes from ship to laboratory, from laboratory to pharmacy, from pharmacy to parlor. Each step removes it further from its origins and closer to unchecked use. By the time it reaches the hands of London's elite, it is no longer a leaf of endurance, it is a symbol of conquest, refinement, and modern power. The fog still hangs over the city, gas lamps glow. Somewhere, far beyond the empire's gaze, coca leaves rustle in the mountain wind. But in London, their transformation is complete. What once sustained the body now tempts the mind, and the distance between those two truths will soon prove devastating. The laboratories come next. Quiet rooms lined with glassware and ledgers, where coal fires burn low and men in dark coats speak softly of measurements and results. Victorian medicine is in the midst of transformation, shedding its older skin of guesswork and tradition in favor of something sharper, cleaner, more authoritative. Chemistry is no longer a curiosity, it is a promise, and cocaine arrives at precisely the moment when medicine is most eager to believe. Doctors greet the new substance not with suspicion, but with excitement. Early experiments describe remarkable effects: heightened alertness, reduced fatigue, temporary freedom from pain. In an era still grappling with crude anesthesia and limited understanding of the nervous system, such results feel revolutionary. Cocaine appears to offer what physicians have long sought: a way to intervene directly in the workings of the mind and body with precision. Medical journals fill with glowing reports. Lectures praise the compound's versatility. It is tested as a local anesthetic, a stimulant, a treatment for melancholy, neurasthenia, and vague nervous complaints that plague the modern citizen. Where older remedies sedate or numb, cocaine invigorates. It does not obscure the patient, it sharpens them. To Victorian doctors, this distinction is crucial. A treatment that preserves composure and productivity aligns perfectly with the values of the age. Prescriptions follow quickly. Small doses are recommended, carefully measured, spoken of with the language of control. The drug's dangers, if mentioned at all, are framed as hypothetical risks associated with misuse, excess, or improper administration. Properly guided by medical authority, cocaine is assumed to be safe. After all, what harm could arise from a substance endorsed by science itself? This confidence rests on a fragile foundation. Victorian medicine, for all its ambition, still understands little about long-term dependence. Addiction is poorly defined, often confused with moral weakness rather than physiological compulsion. If a patient continues to request a remedy, it is assumed they find it helpful, not that they may be unable to function without it. The concept of chemical dependence remains vague, softened by faith in willpower and respectability. Doctors themselves are not immune to the drug's appeal. Long hours, endless patients, the pressure to perform in an increasingly competitive profession all make cocaine an attractive ally. Some physicians experiment on themselves, convinced that their training grants immunity. They note increased focus, reduced fatigue, and an exhilarating sense of clarity. These personal experiences reinforce professional enthusiasm. If it sharpens the doctor's mind, why should it not restore the patient's? Cocaine's reputation grows quickly. It becomes fashionable within medical circles, a symbol of cutting-edge practice. To prescribe it is to demonstrate modernity, to align oneself with progress rather than outdated remedies. Doubt, when it arises, feels regressive, an obstacle to advancement, and so caution is quietly set aside. The drug's cleanliness contributes to this trust. Cocaine leaves no stains, no lingering odor, no visible decay. It does not conjure images of opium dens or gin-soaked slums. Instead, it sits neatly in vials and tins, labeled in precise handwriting. Its very appearance suggests order, control, professionalism. Patients, sensing medical approval, accept it readily. A doctor's prescription carries moral weight. To take cocaine under medical guidance feels responsible, even virtuous. It transforms private use into treatment, indulgence into compliance. High society, already inclined to trust authority and expertise, absorbs this reassurance without question. What no one records in those early journals is the subtle shift in behavior. The patient who returns sooner than expected, the doctor who increases the dose with casual confidence, the growing reliance on stimulation to meet ordinary demands. These changes are too gradual, too discreet to alarm a profession trained to look for immediate crises rather than slow erosion. Cocaine's rise within medicine marks a turning point. Once a substance gains institutional approval, it becomes insulated from scrutiny. Criticism feels not merely skeptical, but disrespectful, an attack on science itself. And in Victorian Britain, few forces command greater reverence than scientific authority. Thus, cocaine settles into its role as medicine's darling, praised, prescribed, and protected by professional certainty. Its dangers remain theoretical, its benefits immediate and visible. The fog outside London's hospitals and homes thickens, unnoticed. Inside, white powder is measured, dispensed, and trusted each dose, reinforcing the belief that progress, once discovered, can never betray those who wield it. It is not excess that condemns a substance in Victorian England. It is appearance. Gin ruins reputations because it is loud. Alcohol reddens faces, loosens tongues, and leaves men sprawled in public view. Opium, though widely used, carries the shadow of the east of dens, pipes, and bodies collapsed into stupor. These vices offend not merely the body, but the Victorian sense of order. They are visible. They disrupt. They announce weakness to the world. Cocaine does none of this. It arrives quietly, contained in small bottles and neatly folded papers, its presence easily concealed within a pocket or dressing case. It leaves no odor on the breath, no haze in the eyes, no immediate loss of composure. On the contrary, it sharpens posture, brightens conversation, and tightens self-control, at least at first. To a society obsessed with outward discipline, this difference matters profoundly. Cocaine feels respectable. It does not invite public shame. It invites private enhancement. A lady may take it before a long evening engagement and appear tireless, radiant, perfectly attentive. A gentleman may use it before an important meeting and find his thoughts flowing with unusual speed and certainty. Nothing appears amiss. Appearances are preserved. Duties are fulfilled. Society continues uninterrupted. This is the drug's greatest deception. Victorian morality is built not on abstinence, but on containment. Desire must be regulated, not eliminated. Weakness must be managed discreetly, not displayed. Cocaine fits neatly into this framework. It offers relief without rebellion, stimulation without disorder. One may partake without abandoning dignity. One may depend without confessing need. In this way, cocaine becomes less a vice than a tool. It sits alongside smelling salts, tonics, and nerve elixirs, part of a growing category of substances designed to correct the body rather than indulge it. Advertisements speak of balance, clarity, vitality. The language is not indulgent, but corrective. Cocaine is framed as something one uses to meet expectations, not escape them. For high society, this framing is irresistible. The Victorian elite live under constant performance. Women are expected to embody grace, restraint, and endless emotional availability. Men are expected to demonstrate strength, decisiveness, and tireless ambition. There is little room for visible fatigue or despair. Cocaine offers a solution that does not challenge these expectations, it reinforces them. It allows individuals to meet society's demands without appearing to strain. And because it does not openly disrupt behavior, its use escapes moral scrutiny. A man who drinks too much is judged. A woman who collapses under the weight of nerves is pitied, then quietly dismissed. But a person who grows sharper, faster, more energetic, raises no alarm. Success is rarely questioned. Doctors, too, contribute to this illusion. By prescribing cocaine within the language of treatment, they transform use into obedience. A patient is not indulging, they are following medical advice. The substance becomes a mark of care rather than excess. In this context, to refuse cocaine might even seem irresponsible, a rejection of modern science. The bottle itself reinforces the illusion. Glass, labeled, precise. It looks clinical, trustworthy, measured. Nothing about it suggests danger. It lacks the theatricality of other drugs, the cultural baggage that might trigger caution. It appears as neutral as ink or iodine. Yet this respectability comes at a hidden cost. Because cocaine preserves outward control, it delays recognition of inner collapse. Dependence grows quietly. Doses increase subtly. Sleep shortens. Appetite fades. Thoughts race. Anxiety sharpens. But so long as the user remains functional, and many do for a long time, these changes are dismissed as quirks of temperament or signs of intensity. Victorian society admires intensity. The drug exploits a dangerous truth. People are far more forgiving of deterioration when it looks like dedication. Thus, cocaine spreads not through scandal, but through success. It is adopted by those who cannot afford to falter, who must remain composed at all costs. Its users are not outcasts, but exemplars, hosts, professionals, thinkers, social leaders. Their approval grants the drug legitimacy far beyond the pharmacy. Respectability, once bottled, becomes intoxicating. And so the powder settles deeper into polite life, protected by etiquette and silence. No laws are broken, no social codes openly violated. Everything appears in order. But beneath the polished surface, reliance is already taking root quietly, invisibly wrapped in glass and certainty, waiting for the moment when appearances will no longer be enough. Between the physician's desk and the drawing room stands another quiet authority, The chemist. Victorian pharmacies are places of reassurance: clean counters, orderly shelves, glass jars labelled in careful script. They smell faintly of alcohol, herbs, and polish. To step inside is to enter a world where ailments have names and solutions come measured, wrapped, and sealed. Trust lives here. And it is here that C0caine finds one of its most reliable gateways into everyday life. The Victorian chemist is not merely a merchant, he is a custodian of modern comfort, a translator of science for the public. In an age when medicine is professionalizing but not yet distant, the chemist occupies an intimate role. Customers know him by name. They consult him quietly. He listens, advises, dispenses. His authority rests not on spectacle, but on consistency and calm. C0caine fits perfectly within this environment. It arrives as an ingredient, an alkaloid to be compounded, diluted, and incorporated into powders, drops, tonics, and lozenges. Rarely does it appear alone. More often it is folded into preparations with reassuring names: nerve restorers, invigorating elixirs, restorative wines. Each formulation carries the implication of balance and benefit, not excess. The chemist's hand, steady and precise, becomes the final stamp of legitimacy. Discretion is part of the service. A folded packet slid across the counter. A small bottle wrapped in paper. No raised voices. No questions asked beyond the necessary. Victorian society values privacy, and the chemist provides it. A customer need not confess weakness to a doctor or endure examination. A brief description of fatigue, melancholy, or strain is enough. The solution is ready. This accessibility accelerates C0caine's spread. What begins as a physician's curiosity becomes, through the chemist, a household remedy. It enters homes alongside smelling salts and headache powders, stored in drawers and cabinets where servants rarely look. Its presence becomes ordinary, familiar, a thing one keeps just in case, and familiarity, once established, breeds confidence. The chemists themselves believe in what they sell. Many are trained, conscientious men, proud participants in the modern scientific age. They read journals, they attend lectures, they see C0caine praised by respected authorities. To withhold it would feel unnecessarily cautious, even regressive. Their role is not to question progress, but to deliver it efficiently. Competition sharpens this impulse. Victorian London is crowded with pharmacies, each eager to attract customers with the latest remedies. Novelty sells. A chemist who offers modern treatments gains reputation. One who hesitates risks irrelevance. C0caine, new and impressive, becomes a marker of being up to date. To stock it is to signal competence and sophistication, and so the substance slips quietly past the boundaries of strict medical oversight. Once it can be obtained without lengthy consultation, its meaning changes. It becomes something one can choose, something one can return to. A remedy not just for illness, but for inconvenience, for weariness, boredom, social strain. The line between treatment and enhancement blurs, then fades entirely. Chemists notice repeat customers, but interpret this as success. The powder works. After all, people return because they feel better. That the relief is temporary, that the need grows sharper with time, is not yet understood. In a culture that equates improvement with virtue, repeated use appears rational. The packaging reinforces the illusion. Bottles are small, quantities modest. Nothing suggests danger in scale. Unlike barrels of gin or pipes of opium, C0caine's presentation implies control. Each dose is tiny, each purchase discreet. The danger feels mathematically impossible. Yet the chemist's counter becomes a quiet hinge point in the story where science, commerce, and desire meet without friction. No alarms sound, no scandals erupt. The transaction is too polite, too reasonable to attract attention. Outside, the city rushes onward. Inside, powders are weighed, labels written, paper folded with practiced care. Confidence changes hands in measured grains. And with each transaction, cocaine embeds itself deeper into Victorian life, not as a temptation, but as a convenience, not as a rebellion, but as a solution. By the time anyone thinks to ask whether the chemists have been dispensing more than remedies, the habit is already established, the bottles are already empty, and the confidence they promised has begun, quietly, to demand repayment. The Victorians give their suffering a name. They call it nervous exhaustion, a polite diagnosis for a condition that seems to afflict only the modern world. It is not madness, not weakness, not illness in the traditional sense. It is fatigue without rest, anxiety without cause, a trembling of the spirit brought on by speed, expectation, and constant awareness. It belongs, notably, to those who work with the mind rather than the hands. Doctors describe it carefully. Patients complain of sleeplessness, irritability, palpitations, sudden despair, and an inability to concentrate. They feel overstimulated yet depleted, alert yet hollow. The city never stops, and neither, it seems, can they. In medical language, the nerves are said to be overwrought, stretched too thin by the demands of modern life. This diagnosis is comforting. It reframes distress as a consequence of progress rather than a personal failing. One is not broken, one is simply modern. And if the condition is modern, then its cure must be modern as well. Cocaine steps neatly into this role. Prescribed in small doses, it appears to do exactly what nervous exhaustion demands. It restores energy without dullness. It sharpens focus without sedation. Patients report immediate relief. The fog lifts. The heart steadies. The mind snaps back into alignment. Where rest cures require withdrawal from life, cocaine allows continuation. One may remain productive, present, engaged. For Victorian physicians, this is a triumph. The rest cure weeks of isolation, enforced inactivity, and bland routine is impractical for many patients, especially men of business and women of society. Cocaine offers an alternative, treatment without interruption. One can attend meetings, host dinners, write letters, manage households. The appearance of normalcy is preserved, and in Victorian culture, appearance often defines health. Patients embrace the remedy eagerly. They describe feeling themselves again, though often it is not a return so much as a transformation. Energy returns brighter than before. Confidence swells. The sense of being overwhelmed dissolves into a crisp, artificial calm. It feels like healing because it feels like relief. Yet nervous exhaustion is not a single ailment. It is a symptom of imbalance, of lives pushed beyond sustainable rhythm. Cocaine does not correct this imbalance, it masks it. It borrows energy from the future and delivers it immediately, without warning of the cost. Doctors rarely see this cost. Appointments are brief. Success is measured by short-term improvement. A patient who reports renewed vigor is deemed cured or at least stabilized. If symptoms return, the dose is adjusted. The logic is linear. More discomfort requires more treatment. What goes unnoticed is the subtle shift in expectation. Patients begin to rely on the sensation of stimulation as their baseline. Ordinary wakefulness feels dull by comparison. Rest, once restorative, becomes intolerable. Silence grows uncomfortable. The nervous system, accustomed to chemical urgency, resists stillness. Victorian society quietly reinforces this dependence. There is admiration for those who seem indefatigable, who manage obligations with ease and sparkle. No one asks how such composure is achieved. To question success would be impolite. To admit reliance would be shameful. Thus, cocaine becomes woven into the management of identity. It is not merely taken to feel better, It is taken to remain acceptable. The exhausted clerk, the anxious hostess, the strained intellectual, all find in it a means to maintain their role without pause. The drug becomes a bridge between expectation and capacity. Even the language surrounding its use reflects denial. Cocaine is spoken of as a tonic, a support, a temporary aid. These words imply neutrality, assistance, impermanence. Dependence is a word reserved for the visibly fallen, not the outwardly functional. But the nerves do not forget. They adapt, then demand. The calm becomes brittle. The stimulation grows less effective. Restlessness returns sharper than before. What was once a cure becomes a necessity, then an obligation. And still the diagnosis remains the same: nervous exhaustion. The solution, predictably, is more of the same. In attempting to treat the strain of modern life, Victorian medicine has discovered a way to intensify it. Cocaine does not slow the world, it accelerates the individual to match it. And in doing so, it quietly ensures that exhaustion will never truly end, only deepen, hidden beneath a veneer of artificial vitality. The strain is not equally visible. In Victorian London, men may speak cautiously of fatigue, ambition, and nerves. Women are expected to endure in silence. Their exhaustion is folded into duty, their anxiety renamed delicacy, their despair softened into sensibility. A woman's suffering, like her virtue, must be discreet. High society demands perfection from its women. They must host without faltering, listen without tiring, smile without strain. Corsets cinch the breath. Etiquette governs every movement. Conversation must be lively but restrained, intelligent but never threatening. Emotions are permitted only in moderation, and even grief must be performed gracefully. There is little space for rest, and none at all for collapse. It is within this narrow corridor of expectation that cocaine begins to circulate among women of the upper classes. At first, it is not spoken of openly. It arrives through prescriptions for nerves, powders recommended by trusted chemists, drops offered quietly by friends, a remedy for headaches, a support for faintness, a means to steady the hands before a long evening. The language remains medical, reassuring, proper. No one calls it stimulation, they call it help. For many women, the effects feel transformative. Fatigue recedes, social anxiety softens. The endless demands of hosting, conversing, and performing womanhood become suddenly manageable. A lady who once dreaded long dinners now glides through them with ease. Her thoughts feel sharper, her speech quicker, her smile effortlessly sustained. She is praised for her composure, her charm, her resilience. No one asks how this has been achieved. Victorian culture rarely questions women's endurance. It celebrates it. A woman who perseveres is virtuous. One who falters is weak. Cocaine allows women to persevere beyond their natural limits, and for that reason alone it is quietly welcomed. It does not grant rebellion, it grants compliance. Unlike alcohol, it does not threaten reputation. A woman who drinks too freely risks scandal. A woman who uses cocaine risks nothing visible at all. There is no smell, no loss of decorum, no slurred confession. She remains controlled, perhaps too controlled. Her energy is praised as admirable, her tirelessness admired as proof of good breeding. Doctors, overwhelmingly male, rarely interpret these changes as warning signs. If a woman reports improved mood and energy, the treatment is considered successful. If she requests more, it is assumed her nerves require continued support. The possibility that the remedy itself might be reshaping her needs goes unspoken. Within the private sphere of the home, the drug becomes a tool of management. Mothers take it to maintain patience. Wives take it to meet expectations without complaint. Young women take it to quiet uncertainty and sharpen confidence in a society that constantly judges them. Cocaine becomes an invisible scaffold, holding up an idealized femininity that few can sustain unaided, yet the cost accumulates quietly. Sleep becomes lighter, more elusive. Appetites diminish. Moods sharpen, then fray. Small irritations feel intolerable. Thoughts race where once they wandered gently. But these changes are internal, easily hidden behind practiced manners and polite silence. A woman is expected to regulate herself, not seek explanation. In some cases, the transformation is misread as improvement of character. A formerly timid woman becomes animated, outspoken, unusually confident. This is interpreted as growth, as maturity, as social polish finally achieved. The role of chemistry is invisible, masked by the narrative of self-cultivation so prized in Victorian life. But stimulation is not serenity. As reliance deepens, moments without the powder feel unbearable. Fatigue returns heavier than before. Anxiety sharpens. The very pressures cocaine once helped manage now feel impossible without it. Yet to admit this reliance would be unthinkable. Dependence carries moral weight, and women bear that weight more harshly than anyone. So, the bottles remain hidden in drawers, the powders remain folded in silk-lined cases. Use continues, quiet and controlled, sanctioned by medicine and protected by etiquette. In lace-trimmed rooms, beneath portraits of restraint and virtue, women push their bodies and minds beyond natural endurance, propped up by a substance that promises strength while quietly eroding it. And because they suffer beautifully, silently, their decline remains unseen, mistaken for grace until it can no longer be concealed. The Victorian age does not merely admire work, it sanctifies it. Industry hums through every corner of London, from counting houses and editorial offices to private studies lit late into the night. Time is measured, scheduled, disciplined. Idleness is treated not as rest, but as moral failure. To be productive is to be worthy. To falter is to fall behind an empire that never pauses to look back. For men of ambition and women quietly managing the labor of society, this expectation becomes relentless. Letters must be written, accounts balanced, articles finished, engagements attended. Minds are expected to remain sharp regardless of exhaustion, grief, or strain. The Victorian world offers status and survival only to those who can keep pace. Cocaine thrives in this environment. It is not marketed as pleasure, but as efficiency. It promises focus without distraction, energy without disorder. It does not demand surrender. It offers acceleration. For clerks buried in paperwork, for writers racing deadlines, for professionals trapped in competition, the drug feels like a private advantage, an edge that turns effort into output. The sensation is intoxicating precisely because it feels earned. Under cocaine's influence, tasks seem manageable, even exhilarating. Thoughts align with unusual speed. Words arrive fully formed. Fatigue recedes as if it were merely a bad habit rather than a biological necessity. The user feels capable of more work, more achievement, more control. It is easy to mistake this chemical urgency for personal discipline. Victorian culture encourages this misinterpretation. Success is attributed to character, not circumstance. If one accomplishes more, one is assumed to be more capable, more virtuous. The means are irrelevant so long as the results conform to expectation. Cocaine hides within this logic, invisible behind the glow of accomplishment. Employers do not ask how productivity is achieved. They reward it. Society applauds tirelessness. A man who works through the night is praised as dedicated. A woman who never appears fatigued is admired as admirable. No one questions the sustainability of such performance. To do so would challenge the entire moral framework of progress. Gradually, the drug becomes woven into routine, a small dose before beginning work, another to push through the afternoon, perhaps one more before an evening engagement. Each use feels justified, necessary even. The day's demands are real, and the relief is immediate. The cost remains abstract, deferred. What begins as enhancement soon becomes expectation. Without the powder, concentration feels sluggish, motivation dulls. Tasks that once seemed manageable now feel oppressive. The nervous system, accustomed to chemical urgency, resists ordinary rhythms. Rest feels unproductive, even threatening. Silence grows uncomfortable. Stillness feels like failure. The user responds predictably by returning to the drug. Victorian medicine offers little resistance to this pattern. If productivity improves, treatment is deemed effective. There is no framework for recognizing overstimulation as harm. The symptoms that follow irritability, insomnia, agitation are often interpreted as signs of continued nervous exhaustion, not evidence of chemical dependence. The solution, again, is stimulation. Thus, the cult of productivity feeds itself. Cocaine does not create ambition, but it amplifies it beyond natural limits. It turns discipline into compulsion and diligence into obsession. The line between work and self erodes. Identity becomes bound to output. To stop is to cease being valuable. The tragedy lies in the illusion of control. Users believe they are mastering time and effort, bending their bodies to their will. In truth, the drug is recalibrating their sense of normalcy, redefining what it means to feel capable. Each dose raises the bar slightly higher, ensuring that yesterday's productivity feels insufficient today. Yet in Victorian society, collapse is not dramatic, it is gradual, quiet. People do not fall suddenly, they fray. They become tense, brittle, restless. Their achievements continue even as their health deteriorates. Because they still produce, they are still praised. Because they still function, they are not seen as unwell. The city continues to demand more, and cocaine, ever obliging, offers the means to comply until compliance itself becomes impossible. The cult of productivity, once sustained by steam and steel, now draws power from the nervous system itself. And as London accelerates, those who fuel it chemically discover too late that productivity, pushed beyond human limits, does not merely exhaust the body. It hollows it out. It moves next into the spaces where reputation is made. Not factories or hospitals, but parlors warmed by firelight, salons humming with conversation, rooms where influence circulates as freely as tea. These are the social engines of Victorian London, the places where alliances form, ideas spread, and standing is quietly negotiated. And here, cocaine finds one of its most discreet and dangerous homes. The Victorian parlour is a theatre of effortlessness. Guests are meant to appear engaged, without strain, brilliant, without arrogance, attentive, without fatigue. Long evenings stretch on beneath chandeliers, punctuated by music, debate, and carefully moderated emotion. The performance is subtle but relentless. To falter, to yawn, to withdraw, to lose the thread of conversation is to risk being forgotten. Cocaine solves this problem elegantly. It is not passed openly, not discussed aloud. It appears in moments of privacy, a folded paper slipped into a gloved hand, a quiet visit upstairs, a brief excuse made with practiced ease, a pinch before rejoining the room, a line drawn carefully on porcelain, wiped away before servants return. Nothing about the exchange suggests urgency. Everything suggests control. Those who partake do not see themselves as indulging. They are preparing. The effect is immediate and seductive. Conversation sharpens. Wit flows effortlessly. Social anxiety dissolves into confidence. The room seems brighter, faster, more alive. Laughter comes easily. Ideas connect with unusual clarity. The user feels not altered, but enhanced, as though this heightened state were merely their true self, finally unburdened. Others notice the change and admire it. A woman who once faded toward the end of the evening now remains radiant until the last guest departs. A gentleman who once listened quietly now dominates discussion with eloquence and certainty. These transformations are attributed to maturity, intelligence, or social polish. No one imagines chemistry. To do so would be impolite. And so imitation follows admiration. Those who feel themselves dull by comparison grow curious. Questions are asked indirectly. Recommendations are offered discreetly. Cocaine spreads not through coercion, but through aspiration. It becomes associated with brilliance, sociability, relevance, the very qualities Victorian society rewards most lavishly. Because use remains hidden, denial is easy. One may convince oneself it is occasional, situational, harmless, a tool reserved for special occasions, yet special occasions multiply. Invitations grow more frequent, expectations rise, the threshold for what feels necessary quietly lowers. In these rooms, cocaine acquires a social meaning distinct from medicine or productivity. It becomes a lubricant of connection, a way to remain present in a world that demands constant engagement. Silence feels dangerous here, withdrawal feels like failure. Cocaine ensures participation, eager, animated, relentless participation. But social spaces are unforgiving mirrors. Under stimulation, conversation may sharpen, but judgment dulls. Words flow faster than restraint. Confidence edges toward arrogance. Laughter grows louder. Irritation surfaces where patience once lived. The drug amplifies not only charm, but volatility. Yet because these moments occur within private gatherings, they are absorbed into gossip rather than diagnosis. A guest leaves early, unsettled. A remark feels sharper than intended. A friendship cools without explanation. The cause remains invisible, misattributed to temperament or misunderstanding. Cocaine's role dissolves into the background, protected by etiquette and silence. Hosts, meanwhile, come to rely on the substance to meet the demands of their own events. To host is to perform endurance as well as generosity. Cocaine allows hosts to remain attentive, animated, and composed long after the body would otherwise insist on rest. The cost is deferred, paid later in sleeplessness and agitation. But by then, the evening has been deemed a success. Thus the drug becomes woven into the rituals of high society, hidden beneath manners and candlelight. Its presence is denied even as its effects are praised. Everyone believes they are witnessing natural brilliance, unaware that much of it is chemically sustained. Over time, the contrast grows unbearable. Without the powder, the room feels dull, the conversation sluggish, the self insufficient. Social life becomes calibrated to stimulation. Normal engagement no longer satisfies. Yet no one speaks of it. Victorian society depends on shared illusions, and cocaine thrives among them. In parlors and salons, beneath portraits of restraint and civility, lines are drawn and erased, secrets kept and normalized. The drug does not disrupt the social order, it intensifies it, pushing bodies and minds to perform beyond their limits in the name of connection. And when the lights dim and the last guest departs, the silence that follows feels heavier than before, too quiet, too empty, driving the user back toward the same discrete solution again and again, until the parlor no longer feels survivable without it. The Victorian mind is under siege. Books multiply, newspapers thicken, journals arrive daily, demanding attention, opinion, response. Ideas no longer gestate slowly, they compete. To think clearly, quickly, and convincingly becomes a form of survival, especially for those whose status depends on intellect rather than inheritance alone. Writers, scholars, barristers, editors, these are the people who feel the pressure first. Their worth is measured not in hours worked, but in sentences produced, arguments sharpened, insights delivered before rivals can claim them. Originality is prized, but speed decides who is heard. In this environment, fatigue is not merely inconvenient, it is dangerous. Cocaine appears to offer salvation. Among intellectual circles, the drug gains a reputation not just for stimulation, but for clarity. Users describe a sensation of mental alignment, as though scattered thoughts suddenly snap into order. Ideas connect rapidly, memory sharpens, confidence surges, words arrive with unusual ease, spilling onto the page or into debate with thrilling momentum. For the Victorian thinker, this feels miraculous. Writing that once required hours of labor now pours out in torrents. Long nights yield productive mornings. Arguments feel airtight, insights profound. The mind, briefly liberated from hesitation and doubt, seems capable of anything. It is easy, dangerously easy, to attribute this brilliance to one's true potential finally unlocked. Praise follows quickly. Editors accept submissions, audiences applaud lectures, colleagues remark on sudden sharpness, on energy that seems almost superhuman. The drug's effects are externalized as success, and success reinforces belief. If the work is admired, the method must be justified. Cocaine hides behind achievement, cloaked in the respectability of results. Yet the stimulation is not neutral. Cocaine accelerates thought, but it does not deepen it. It favors speed over reflection, certainty over nuance. Under its influence, ideas feel complete before they are fully tested. Doubt fades not because questions have been answered, but because they no longer intrude. The user mistakes intensity for insight, momentum for mastery. Victorian culture does little to challenge this confusion. Confidence is persuasive, eloquence is admired. Few pause to examine whether rapid brilliance conceals fragility beneath. In a world intoxicated by progress, faster thinking appears inherently superior. But the mind adapts. The first use feels extraordinary. Subsequent uses feel necessary. Without the powder, writing slows, thought stumbles, inspiration dries up. The contrast becomes unbearable. What once felt like enhancement now feels like restoration. The drug is no longer taken to exceed ability, but to reach it at all. Intellectual labor becomes chemically scaffolded. This dependence is particularly insidious because it masquerades as discipline. The user tells himself he is working harder, pushing further, refusing complacency. In truth, he is narrowing his range of thought, training his mind to operate only under artificial conditions. Reflection becomes uncomfortable, silence becomes intolerable. Creativity, once slow and organic, grows brittle and compulsive. Colleagues notice changes, though they rarely name them. Conversation grows sharper, but less generous. Arguments become relentless. The stimulated mind struggles with patience, with listening, with doubt. Disagreement feels personal. Criticism feels unbearable. Paranoia creeps in quietly, disguised as intellectual vigilance. Sleep erodes. Nights stretch longer as the mind refuses rest, spinning endlessly through ideas and anxieties. The body grows thin, the eyes darken, yet output continues, and output is what matters. So long as work appears brilliant, deterioration is dismissed as eccentricity, the accepted cost of genius. Victorian society has always romanticized the suffering thinker. Exhaustion is proof of dedication. Irritability is forgiven as intensity. Cocaine exploits this myth perfectly. It accelerates production while quietly hollowing out the mind that produces it. Eventually, cracks appear. Ideas grow repetitive. Confidence curdles into rigidity. The flow that once felt effortless becomes frantic. The drug no longer delivers brilliance, it merely postpones collapse. But by now, the user cannot imagine thinking without it. The mind, rewired by stimulation, resists ordinary consciousness. In seeking intellectual brilliance on demand, Victorian thinkers have embraced a tool that promises mastery over thought itself. For a time, it delivers. Then, it demands loyalty, repetition, escalation. And when the powder no longer works as it once did, the mind trained to run at unnatural speed discovers that it has forgotten how to walk. He notices the hours first. Not the long ones spent with patience, but the short ones stolen from the night. Sleep comes late, if at all, and when it does, it fractures easily, thin, unsatisfying, gone by dawn. The physician tells himself this is the price of dedication. The city needs him. The modern world does not wait. Victorian doctors are under immense strain. They stand at the intersection of science and suffering, expected to heal with certainty in an era still riddled with doubt. New treatments arrive constantly, each demanding study, experimentation, confidence. To fall behind is to risk irrelevance. To hesitate is to appear old-fashioned. The physician's authority depends on mastery, and mastery demands vigilance. Cocaine offers vigilance in powdered form. At first, it is purely professional, a small dose to sharpen focus before a lecture, another to push through late-night reading of journals and case notes. The effect is gratifying. Fatigue retreats. Thought sharpens. The doctor feels alert, capable, precise. Patients benefit. Colleagues admire his stamina. There seems no downside, only efficiency gained. He begins to recommend the drug with increased assurance. Personal experience becomes evidence. If cocaine allows him to work longer, think faster, endure pressure, why should it not do the same for others? His prescriptions grow more confident, his warnings more muted. The drug has proven itself, at least to him. Medicine, after all, values results. What he does not see or refuses to see is the change within himself. The nights grow shorter. Restlessness replaces fatigue. His mind refuses to settle, replaying conversations, diagnoses, imagined errors. He becomes irritable, then defensive. Small criticisms feel sharp, doubt feels intolerable, yet his output remains impressive. He publishes, he lectures, he works tirelessly. From the outside, he appears exemplary. Victorian medicine has little language for this contradiction. A doctor who works endlessly is admired, not questioned. Exhaustion is expected, irritability excused. The profession celebrates sacrifice, especially when paired with visible success. No one suggests that the very substance he prescribes might be driving his deterioration. To do so would challenge not only a treatment, but the authority of the healer himself. The physician increases his dose, rationalizing the decision clinically. Tolerance, he notes, is to be expected. Adjustment is reasonable. He tells himself he remains in control, that his training protects him from excess. Addiction is something that happens to the undisciplined, the morally weak. He is neither, yet control is already slipping. Without cocaine, his hands tremble slightly. Concentration wavers. The calm certainty he once felt evaporates, replaced by a gnawing unease. He interprets this not as withdrawal, but as proof that his nerves are overtaxed by work. The solution seems obvious: more stimulation, more support. Patients notice subtle changes. The doctor listens less patiently, interrupts more readily. His advice grows brisk, sometimes harsh. He appears driven, intense, almost frantic. But his reputation shields him. Success excuses excess. At night, he paces. The city hums faintly beyond his window, a reminder that progress never sleeps. He reaches for the familiar powder, convinced it will restore balance. For a moment, it does. Then the agitation returns, sharper than before. This is the quiet danger of authority unchecked. When physicians become patients of their own remedies, objectivity dissolves. The line between treatment and dependence blurs. Cocaine, once a tool, becomes a companion, then a necessity. Victorian medicine, so eager to master the body, fails to recognize how easily the healer's own body can become a site of experimentation. The physician who would not sleep believes he is pushing forward for the sake of progress. In truth, he is being carried by it, swept along by the same currents that exhaust his patients. By the time doubt creeps in, by the time he wonders whether the drug has taken more than it has given, his authority, his habits, and his pride make retreat difficult. To question cocaine now would be to question himself, and so he presses on, sleepless, restless, certain that tomorrow will bring clarity. The powder promises it always does. There comes a moment when discretion softens into acceptance, not openly, not officially, but quietly through repetition, admiration, and silence. Cocaine no longer feels new, it feels established, familiar, and in Victorian London, familiarity is the final step before fashion. What was once spoken of in medical terms begins to acquire social meaning. The powder slips from prescription into preference. People no longer ask whether it is useful, they assume it is. The question becomes how, when, and among whom it is taken. In this subtle shift, cocaine completes its transformation from remedy to indulgence, one rendered respectable by context and class. Fashion in Victorian society is never frivolous. It signals belonging. It distinguishes those who move at the center of modern life from those who trail behind it. To adopt what is current is to demonstrate awareness, relevance, refinement. Cocaine, discreet and modern, becomes part of this unspoken language. It is never advertised as excess, that would be vulgar. Instead, it is framed as discernment, a thing used by those who understand their bodies, their minds, their limits. Those who cannot handle it, it is implied, simply lack discipline. Thus, indulgence is recast as expertise. Among high society, the drug circulates through recommendation rather than confession. A friend suggests it for long evenings. A hostess offers it quietly to trusted guests. A professional mentions it in passing as a means of staying sharp. No one boasts, no one warns. Silence itself becomes endorsement. Cocaine's appeal lies partly in what it does not do. It does not disrupt schedules. It does not require recovery days. It does not announce itself with spectacle. One may take it and continue exactly as expected, only better, more alert, more charming, more capable. It flatters the illusion that one has mastered modern life, rather than merely medicated it. This illusion spreads quickly. Those who decline the drug begin to feel subtly inadequate. They tire sooner. They withdraw earlier. Their conversation lags. Without realizing it, they measure themselves against chemically enhanced standards. The culture shifts around them. Energy levels rise. Expectations sharpen. What once counted as engagement now feels insufficient. Thus, cocaine becomes fashionable not because it is celebrated, but because it recalibrates normalcy. Victorian society has always enforced conformity gently but relentlessly. To fall out of step is to risk invisibility. Cocaine ensures one remains aligned with the pace of those who matter. It is taken not to stand out, but to avoid falling behind. Doctors observe this trend with ambivalence. Some grow uneasy at the drug's casual use, but lack evidence to challenge it. Others rationalize its spread as inevitable. If society demands more from its members, should medicine not provide the means to comply? Few are willing to risk professional standing by questioning a substance that has become socially embedded. The press, too, remains largely silent. Cocaine lacks the visual drama of other vices. There are no drunken brawls, no public dens to expose. Its damage unfolds slowly, privately, often among those powerful enough to suppress scandal. Without spectacle, there is no story, only whispers. Behind closed doors, however, the cost becomes harder to ignore. Appetites vanish, sleep fractures, moods sharpen into irritability or paranoia. The stimulated confidence that once felt exhilarating now feels brittle. Small frustrations provoke disproportionate reactions. Yet these symptoms are dismissed as temperament, stress, or the inevitable burden of modern life. Because cocaine has become fashionable, its effects are normalized. What might once have prompted concern is now explained away. A restless night is the price of ambition, a racing mind the mark of intelligence, a thinning frame the sign of dedication. The drug hides behind the narratives Victorian society already tells itself about success. In this way, indulgence becomes self-reinforcing. Those who suffer most are least likely to speak, for to admit harm would be to admit misjudgment, to fall out of fashion. Silence preserves status, even as health erodes. Cocaine no longer needs advocacy. It has achieved something far more powerful: cultural permission. It lives not in speeches or slogans, but in habits, expectations, and unspoken agreement. It has become part of the costume of modern life, as essential as composure and restraint. And because it wears the mask of fashion rather than vice, it continues its quiet work unchecked until the illusion can no longer sustain the bodies and minds asked to uphold it. The body protests, in silence. Not with screams, not with collapse, but with subtle, insistent signals that the mind chooses to ignore. The hand trembles slightly when lifted too long, the eyelids flutter in defiance of endless engagement, the stomach whispers of meals refused. The human frame, unlike society's expectations, cannot endure indefinitely. Yet Victorian London demands that it try, and cocaine obliges, propping the body like a fragile scaffold under an impossible weight. It begins slowly, almost imperceptibly. A woman notices that sleep arrives later than it should, yet rising feels easier than it has any right to be. A gentleman finds his pulse quickened in the morning, but it is steady enough for appearances. Each day the body bends a little more to accommodate ambition, decorum, and social expectation. Each day, the drug smooths over what would otherwise be collapse. Sleep becomes an alien concept. No longer restorative, it exists as a brief interlude between periods of stimulation. Even in slumber, the mind is restless, revisiting conversations, rehearsing engagements, reviewing letters written in haste, wondering whether yesterday's energy can be matched again today. Dreams grow vivid, sometimes hallucinatory, yet the body remains superficially unchanged, as though cocaine has replaced the natural rhythms entirely. The heart, too, becomes a quiet witness. It beats with unnatural regularity at first, then quickens subtly with repeated use, then falters unpredictably. Tremors appear, first in fingers, then hands, then limbs, so slight that they can be concealed beneath gloves or beneath the careful positioning of porcelain teacups. A society obsessed with composure rarely notices. In this world, what is seen matters more than what is felt. Appetite falters, meals shrink, nutrition, once a routine pleasure, becomes an inconvenience. Yet this is celebrated rather than mourned. Weight lost is framed as refinement, slenderness as elegance. The body, in its silent erosion, is applauded. The drug, by sustaining energy, disguises deprivation as discipline. There are other signs, quieter still. The complexion loses warmth, replaced by a pallor that seems sophisticated rather than sickly. Eyes, though bright, acquire a certain intensity, a sharpness that unnerves those unaccustomed to it. Hands may twitch during conversation, fingers tapping rhythms only the user perceives. These are not yet considered illness. They are, at first, charm, idiosyncrasy, or the cost of brilliance. Yet internal strain grows. Organs demand more than they are given. Nerves, overstimulated for months or years, fray. The skin becomes thin. Muscles ache beneath a veneer of taut posture. Minor injuries recover more slowly. Illnesses are masked by heightened alertness, leaving the body to betray itself in ways unnoticed until collapse can no longer be ignored. Victorian society provides cover. The very qualities that cocaine enhances, alertness, charm, energy, perseverance, also conceal degradation. Complaints are explained as nerves, stress, temperament, or moral fiber. Public appearances are maintained flawlessly. Observers admire what they see and ignore what they cannot. The body, though exhausted, is judged healthy because it performs. Appearances validate the illusion. Dependence, subtle and cumulative, intertwines with these physical changes. The user no longer takes the drug merely to enhance, but to function at a baseline now defined by stimulation. The body, rewired by repeated use, becomes restless, irritable, demanding the powder to feel normal. Rest without it feels unbearable. Even moments of quiet are interpreted as weakness. The paradox is cruel. Cocaine extends capacity, yet erodes resilience. It preserves performance, yet dismantles natural strength. The body, asked to endure without pause, becomes a vessel of contradiction, outwardly flawless, inwardly exhausted. The more it yields to the demands of society, the more it depends on the very powder that undermines it. In parlors and studies, behind lace curtains and polished oak, London's elite continue their routines, unaware of the quiet battles their bodies fight. The pulse races, the hand trembles, the night stretches endless, yet the mind and the drug insist that nothing is wrong. The body will not rest, and society will not see. And in this tension, the first true cost of fashionable indulgence begins to take form. Appearances remain paramount. Victorian society measures worth in composure, in charm, in the subtle dance of courtesy and wit. A gentleman must greet his peers with confidence. A lady must smile without faltering, converse without awkwardness, appear fully engaged even when exhaustion gnaws beneath the ribs. The face becomes a mask of propriety, polished to perfection, concealing the chaos that simmers underneath. And it is here, in the theatre of expression, that cocaine exerts one of its most insidious effects. The first signs are subtle. The smile stretches a fraction longer than natural. Eyes glint with intensity, though sometimes it is a spark rather than warmth. Laughter follows conversation, yet it is slightly faster, slightly sharper, as if rehearsed. The gestures are precise, controlled, deliberate. Onlookers perceive energy, charisma, vivacity. They see someone fully alive. But the body tells another story, and the mind, even more quietly, tells yet another. Cocaine shapes the expression as it shapes the nervous system. Facial muscles, artificially energized, refuse relaxation. Eyelids remain open when they should rest. The lips curve politely, but the eyes, betraying inner strain, flicker with tension. In reflection or candlelight, one might notice a slight rigidity, a subtle hollowness that the smiling mask cannot conceal. Yet, in society, these signals are overlooked or rationalized as intensity, as engagement, as refinement. This dissonance between expression and reality becomes habitual. The powder teaches the body to appear alert when it is tired, to feign cheer when it is anxious, to maintain composure when nerves fray. Social interaction becomes less a reflection of feeling than a performance of energy, with cocaine as its silent stagehand. The more the substance is relied upon, the more seamless the performance and the more detached the individual becomes from the natural rhythms of mind and body. Victorians, accustomed to reading subtle cues for propriety, fail to notice the corruption beneath. Charm is rewarded, confidence applauded, composure admired. An exhausted woman who smiles flawlessly through dinner is hailed for grace. A man whose gaze is sharp and gestures assured is deemed capable and charismatic. No one asks why she cannot relax afterward or why he struggles to sleep. In a culture where effortlessness is equated with virtue, the chemical enhancement is invisible. There is a peculiar cruelty in this concealment. The very qualities that render cocaine effective in society, the sustained smile, the steady hand, the alert gaze, also accelerate reliance. Each social interaction, each prolonged engagement, is a reminder that normal energy is insufficient. The powder is needed not for indulgence, but for survival within the social code. Performance becomes inseparable from consumption, and yet the eyes remain a quiet witness. In private, they betray fatigue, anxiety, and sometimes fear. Shadows accumulate beneath them, iris sharp but distant. The body aches, the mind races, but the gaze, trained by repeated use, can mask inner turmoil. Observers see only the brightness of engagement, the warmth of humor, the precision of gesture. The disparity between public perception and private reality grows daily, yet remains unnoticed or unspoken. Friends and colleagues may comment on newfound vivacity, attributing energy to character, intelligence, or refinement. The user accepts these accolades without revealing the hidden source. Praise reinforces use. Dependence is reinforced by admiration. Each social success is both reward and tether. Over time, the gap widens. The smile becomes automatic. The eyes, though bright, become hollowed mirrors of intensity rather than emotion. The body and mind strain against their own limitations, hidden beneath the veneer of composure. Cocaine maintains the illusion of vitality while quietly eroding the foundation upon which it rests. Thus, the paradox of Victorian refinement emerges. Brilliance is visible, dependence invisible. Charm is praised, strain ignored, energy is demanded, exhaustion concealed. The smile never reaches the eyes, yet no one asks why. And in this quiet theatre of propriety, cocaine continues its invisible work, sustaining appearances while subtly dismantling the life beneath. In Victorian London, reliance is rarely acknowledged. Weakness is masked beneath etiquette, effort is celebrated above all, and failure is framed as a lapse of character rather than a consequence of circumstance. Yet here, in the quiet spaces of drawing rooms, laboratories, and private chambers, a new form of reliance begins to emerge, one that carries no obvious stigma because it masquerades as refinement. Dependence on cocaine. It begins innocuously, a pinch before a long evening, a drop before a lecture, a measured dose to steady nerves before a social engagement. Each use is deliberate, controlled, justified. There is no loss of decorum, no visible collapse. The individual performs admirably. In society's eyes, nothing is wrong. In fact, the person appears more capable, more vivacious, more attentive than ever before. This concealment is crucial. Victorian morality is outward-facing. One's reputation depends not on the struggles endured in private, but on the composure maintained in public. To be seen faltering is to invite censure. To be admired is to command respect. Cocaine's effects, enhancing alertness, charm, and sociability without obvious cost, perfectly align with these societal imperatives. Dependence, if it exists, remains invisible precisely because the world judges appearances. The individual may sense the growing need, but interprets it not as weakness, but as a sign of diligence. Longer hours require longer support. Social demands justify repeated doses. Nervous exhaustion is a valid excuse. Even when the body protests tremors in the hand, insomnia at night, anxiety during quiet moments, these signals are reframed as consequences of ambition, intellect, or sensitivity. The reliance becomes moralized. To continue using is not indulgent, it is responsible. Physicians, too, contribute to this perception. Their endorsements, often cautious at first, reinforce the idea that controlled use is acceptable, even commendable. If the patient performs well, the treatment is a success. Repeated requests are interpreted as need, not compulsion. Doctors, figures of authority, and moral guidance provide tacit validation, dependence is thus sanctioned, normalized, and ultimately celebrated under the guise of propriety. Social networks further conceal and perpetuate the phenomenon. Among the elite, shared admiration for stamina and composure reinforces usage. Those who participate quietly reinforce a culture in which energy, focus, and charm are expected and chemically supported. Gossip praises brilliance, never questioning the methods behind it. One's success is proof not only of personal discipline, but of the harmlessness of the substance sustaining it. Yet the psychological cost accumulates, hidden beneath this veneer of respectability. The mind grows accustomed to stimulation as its baseline. Ordinary wakefulness feels dull. Ordinary performance feels inadequate. Anxiety and restlessness emerge in moments of pause, often interpreted as signs of fatigue or temperament rather than chemical influence. The user learns to fear stillness, to associate normalcy with inefficiency, weakness, or failure. Bodies, too, reveal strain in subtle ways. Sleeplessness, weight loss, tension, palpitations, these are minor, easily concealed or rationalized. The very signs of dependence are interpreted as evidence of refinement or dedication. Victorian culture, which prizes endurance and visible composure, amplifies the illusion that all is well. Dependence thrives in secrecy and social approval. Thus, a paradox emerges. The very qualities admired by society, energy, focus, charm, tireless participation, become both the mechanism and the mask of reliance. Cocaine, once a tool to enhance performance, quietly transforms into a necessity, yet one that carries no shame because it maintains appearances. The individual is lauded even as the body and mind demand more, deeper, faster. In this age of propriety, dependence has no name, no condemnation, only subtle approval. And therein lies its most insidious power. It grows not in rebellion but in compliance. Within the grand houses of London, domestic life is a stage as exacting as any parlor or salon. Victorian women navigate expectations that stretch from gilded morning rooms to candlelit dining halls. A wife must appear attentive, gentle, yet commanding. A mother must manage children, servants, and household affairs with an unshakable calm. Fatigue is unseemly, anxiety intolerable. In this climate, even the slightest falter risks gossip, judgment, or subtle diminishment in social standing. It is here that cocaine finds fertile ground. The drug offers an elegant solution: energy without sloppiness, calm without resignation, attentiveness without complaint. A mother can rise early, dress children in perfect order, and orchestrate meals, errands, and lessons without showing strain. A wife can maintain conversation, navigate social obligations, and project charm and intelligence, all while the body hums beneath an artificial steadiness. The powder ensures that domestic labor, once invisible and exhausting, becomes performative, effortless, almost magical. Yet this performance comes at a hidden cost. The woman who relies upon it learns to interpret chemical alertness as moral or social necessity. Nights are shortened, but vigilance remains. Even brief pauses become discomforting, almost guilty. Sleep, once restorative, is now a fragile interlude, a pause in ongoing obligation rather than a renewal of strength. Appetite diminishes, or meals are consumed mechanically while hands continue work elsewhere. The body's protests are quieted by stimulation, but they are not gone. Cocaine also shapes emotional labor. Motherhood in Victorian society is an exercise in perpetual attention, soothing infants, instructing children, moderating disputes, and presenting a calm exterior regardless of inner turmoil. The drug smooths irritation, tempers impatience, and sharpens focus. producing the appearance of limitless patience. Yet this same mechanism fosters emotional dissonance. The outward expression of serenity can mask inner anxiety, restlessness, or mounting despair. Children, servants, and even husbands may see composure, but never the strain it conceals. Marriage, too, becomes intertwined with chemical maintenance. Social expectation demands constant engagement with a spouse, conversation, companionship, support, and subtle negotiation of status and influence. Fatigue is interpreted as inattention, distraction as weakness. Cocaine provides the stamina to fulfill these invisible contracts. It allows a woman to navigate her husband's moods, family politics, and public appearances with the appearance of unflagging grace. The powder becomes a silent ally in the negotiation of power and propriety, sustaining the illusion that domestic life is easily mastered. Doctors and chemists contribute to the normalization of this reliance. Prescriptions and discreet recommendations frame cocaine as a support for nerves, a remedy for melancholy, or a tonic for fatigue. Its use is interpreted as prudence rather than indulgence. Even repeated doses are explained away. One's obligations are too great, one's energy naturally taxed. Social necessity legitimizes chemical intervention, yet dependence grows imperceptibly. The first dose is measured, occasional, sanctioned. Subsequent doses become habitual, a quiet scaffolding holding up domestic responsibility. The line between enhancement and necessity blurs. Women learn to fear exhaustion more than the substance itself. Calm, attentiveness, and charm, the qualities most valued by society, are now inseparable from chemical support. Cocaine, in the sphere of marriage and motherhood, thus becomes both servant and master. It allows the performance of duty with apparent ease, earning admiration and praise, yet quietly reshapes the body, mind, and perception of limits. The powder maintains appearances, masks strain, and reinforces social expectation, even as dependence deepens. The Victorian home, bathed in gaslight and shadow, becomes a theatre of perfection, sustained by white powder, a calm that is at once admired, expected, and chemically enforced. In the heart of Victorian London, influence is measured in energy as much as wealth. Boardrooms, clubs, and private studies demand constant vigilance. Men of power, bankers, politicians, barristers, and industrialists are expected to maintain composure while orchestrating the machinery of empire. Decisions must be swift, connections managed, appearances maintained. Fatigue is not merely inconvenient, it is dangerous. A lapse could cost fortune, reputation, or authority. In such a world, stamina is currency, and cocaine becomes a silent investment. The substance is embraced with discretion, its use hidden beneath the veneer of propriety. It does not require a den, a pipe, or a bottle of gin. It is neat, clean, almost invisible. A pinch taken in solitude before a meeting, a small vial consulted before a long evening, a discreet dose to sharpen thought or steady nerves. These gestures are invisible to the untrained eye. Yet their effects ripple outward, shaping demeanor, speech, and perception. For men of influence, the allure is not indulgence, it is control. Cocaine promises alertness without disorder, confidence without arrogance, focus without fatigue. A financier can read ledgers late into the night, executing transactions that span continents without betraying strain. A politician can endure endless debate, projecting authority even when sleepless, unwell, or anxious. The powder allows the body to comply with society's exacting demands, to appear inexhaustible, relentless, superior. Its use feels not recreational but rational, a calculated enhancement of ability. The first doses are usually framed in medical terms. Physicians, often men themselves, prescribe it for nerves, stamina, or intellectual acuity. Professional trust legitimizes its use. What might be seen as excess elsewhere becomes prudent optimization here. Dependence, if noticed, is rationalized. The obligations are extraordinary, the demands unforgiving. One cannot be faulted for employing every means available to maintain performance, yet the effects are not purely external. The mind races. Thoughts connect with unusual speed. Decisions feel sharper, arguments more compelling, memory more precise, confidence rises, sometimes to arrogance. Impatience, irritability, and obsession remain hidden behind the mask of authority. The body follows the mind, responding to chemical stimulation with energy that is not naturally earned, yet is socially rewarded. This creates a feedback loop. Success encourages use enables further success, and the two reinforce one another. Cultural norms protect the pattern. A man who sleeps little, works constantly, and maintains composure is praised as industrious, disciplined, exceptional. Illness is excused if performance continues. Anxiety is reframed as intensity. Appearance validates chemical support. The drug's role remains hidden because it produces exactly what society admires. No scandal arises, no censure appears. Only admiration grows, and with it, the subtle entrenchment of reliance. Over time, tolerance develops, doses increase, sleep erodes, appetite diminishes. Heart, nerves, and mind strain against prolonged stimulation. Subtle tremors, palpitations, and psychological unease become companions. Yet because these men continue to function, and often excel, their decline remains invisible. Society sees mastery, the individual experiences dependence. Cocaine's presence in corridors of power shapes not just performance, but judgment. Decisions are made with chemical confidence. Risk is perceived differently. Ambition sharpens, but caution dulls. Men of influence, trusting the powder's assistance, may push further than prudence dictates, unaware that their stamina is borrowed, not inherent. In Victorian London, then, cocaine is more than a remedy or a stimulant. It is an instrument of social and professional survival, a hidden partner in the exercise of power. It extends capacity while concealing cost, allowing men to meet society's exacting demands with apparent ease. And in doing so, it creates a paradox. Brilliance and composure, celebrated publicly, depend upon a substance that steadily erodes the very foundations of mind and body beneath the polished surface. In Victorian London, morality is a carefully constructed mask. It is not merely a measure of conduct, but a performance of propriety, decorum, and self-restraint. Men and women alike are expected to navigate the rigid codes of behavior that define status, reputation, and honor. Every gesture, every smile, every word is evaluated, recorded in the social ledger of respectability. Fatigue, indulgence, or emotional collapse threatens this delicate facade. Within this framework, cocaine finds its most insidious advantage. It allows transgression to masquerade as virtue. The powder arrives silently, neatly, and with an air of scientific authority. Doctors prescribe it for nerves, for stamina, for the faint tremors of mental strain. Chemists dispense it in measured doses, discreet and unremarkable. In drawing rooms and studies, it is consumed with an air of precision and necessity, a supplement to effort rather than indulgence. It does not corrupt manners, nor loosen speech, nor betray the body. On the contrary, it preserves the very qualities Victorian society prizes: energy, focus, charm, and composure. And so its use is morally invisible. A lady may sip it before a social gathering, maintaining calm while orchestrating conversation, attendance, and appearance. A gentleman may dose himself before a late night of study, debate, or business, projecting intellect and authority with effortless grace. To observers, No transgression is apparent. No indulgence is visible. The mask of morality remains intact, reinforced by the very chemical that threatens to undermine it. The danger lies in the subtle distortion of perception. Cocaine amplifies qualities that society already values. Alertness becomes righteousness. Focus becomes discipline. Energy becomes virtue. Dependence is framed as duty. Exhaustion is interpreted as weakness, not as consequence. Those who rely on the substance feel themselves morally justified because their performance conforms to expectation. The drug's effects are interpreted not as artificial, but as evidence of self-mastery. Victorian culture complicates matters further. Privilege provides insulation from scrutiny. The elite, already accustomed to shaping appearances, interpret enhanced composure as proof of character rather than chemistry. Social networks praise stamina, intellect, and charm. The boundaries between enhancement and virtue blur. One does not appear indulgent because the performance aligns perfectly with societal ideals. Cocaine, in this sense, is not just tolerated, it is celebrated, even when its influence is profound and secret. Psychologically, this fosters denial. Users convince themselves that reliance is rational, that fatigue and anxiety are natural obstacles to be overcome by will and intellect. They interpret stimulation as evidence of moral and mental fortitude rather than chemical dependence. Each dose becomes justified, each performance validated. Private collapse is hidden behind public success, and with each repetition, dependence deepens while shame remains absent. The mask, however, cannot endure forever. As doses accumulate and tolerance increases, the body and mind strain against the limits imposed by prolonged stimulation. Tremors appear, insomnia persists, anxiety intensifies, and moods fluctuate. Yet outwardly, the individual continues to meet society's expectations. Observers see only composure and brilliance. Appearances shield reality. The moral mask protects both the user and the perception of propriety, even as internal structures fray. In this dynamic, cocaine transforms morality itself. It allows virtue to be performed chemically rather than earned. Ethics become a façade maintained by powder rather than a product of choice or restraint. The individual believes in integrity, diligence, and refinement, unaware that these qualities are sustained by stimulation rather than discipline. Thus, Victorian London becomes a theatre of contradiction, brilliance and virtue admired, reliance and exhaustion hidden, public morality upheld, private deterioration ignored. The mask is perfect, convincing, and ultimately lethal not because it is false in appearance, but because it conceals the very mechanisms by which it is sustained. Behind every poised smile, every attentive gesture, and every tireless performance, the powder whispers quietly, "You are only as moral, as capable, as enduring as I allow." The most insidious danger is the one that cannot be seen. In Victorian London, cocaine's true power lies not in spectacle, but in its quiet erosion of body, mind, and will. Unlike alcohol or opium, which announce themselves through slurred speech, flushed skin, or public collapse, cocaine works in secrecy. It sustains appearances while undermining foundations, leaving the user and the observers who admire them oblivious to the slow decay beneath polished surfaces. At first, the signs are subtle. A hand trembles slightly when holding a teacup. Eyelids flicker during conversation. Appetite wanes, meals are skipped, and weight diminishes imperceptibly. Sleep shortens, yet the individual rises with a semblance of energy, the illusion complete. Colleagues, family, and friends notice vigor and charm. They do not see fatigue or erosion. The decline is invisible because it does not announce itself. It hides beneath performance. The mind begins to strain in ways difficult to measure. Thoughts arrive faster than reflection can follow. Insights feel brilliant but are often shallow. Connections forced rather than organic. Memory sharpens selectively, retaining the useful while discarding the mundane. Anxiety grows in the gaps between activity, unspoken and unnoticed, creeping into private moments. These internal shifts are often interpreted as mere temperament, intensity, or ambition, never as a chemical consequence. The user is, in effect, training the mind to rely on stimulation as the baseline for normality. Physical deterioration accompanies these mental distortions, but subtly. Palpitations whisper of strain on the heart. Tremors expand from fingers to limbs, so slight they can be hidden by posture or gloves. The skin pales, muscles tighten, small injuries recover more slowly. Each symptom is explainable within the rationalized confines of Victorian logic. Fatigue is a sign of diligence, pallor a mark of refinement, irritability the cost of responsibility. The powder's role is concealed by interpretation. Socially, the consequences are no less concealed. In parlors, clubs, and homes, the user maintains impeccable composure. Energy, wit, and charm are celebrated. Even when chemically sustained, the very qualities that mask decline are those most admired. Peers mistake stimulation for innate vigor. The city rewards endurance, oblivious to the cost. Reputation becomes a shield, insulating the user from scrutiny and reinforcing the illusion that all is well. Dependence grows quietly, almost imperceptibly. What begins as occasional enhancement becomes habitual necessity. The baseline of performance shifts. Ordinary alertness feels inadequate. Ordinary focus, insufficient. The individual fears stillness, rests only reluctantly, and interprets chemical reliance as duty rather than indulgence. This psychological recalibration ensures that decline remains invisible even to the self. What feels like discipline is, in truth, chemical obligation. Even physicians, those entrusted with guiding proper use, often fail to perceive the danger. Success is equated with health. A patient who appears brilliant and energetic is deemed well. Signs of strain are dismissed as idiosyncrasy or temperament. Medical authority, intended to safeguard, becomes part of the mechanism that obscures harm. By the time fatigue becomes undeniable, the process is already advanced. Cognitive agility is diminished, emotional regulation frayed, and physical reserves depleted. Yet the city sees only composure, the salons see charm, the offices see brilliance. The decline has remained invisible because appearances have been maintained. C0caine, subtle and disciplined, preserves the façade while dismantling the foundation. In Victorian London, the invisible decline is perhaps the most Victorian of tragedies. Relentless performance, upheld by chemical support, admired by peers, sanctioned by authority, yet quietly eroding the very faculties that society prizes. The body, mind, and spirit yield incrementally, unnoticed, until the illusion can no longer be sustained, and by then, the cost is irrevocable. In Victorian London, the most dangerous conversations are the ones that never occur. Behind the thick velvet curtains of townhouses, in the dim glow of gas lamps, and across polished mahogany tables, whispers circulate quiet, deliberate, and laden with judgment. They speak of a restlessness, a nervous brightness, a vivacity that seems almost too precise. Yet no one names the cause. The powder remains unmentioned, hidden in drawers, wrapped in silk, or simply assumed to be part of refinement. Discretion shields the guilty, while suspicion and curiosity fester in silence. In these private corridors, gossip becomes a currency. Observers note changes in behavior, the subtle tension in a hand, the ever-present sparkle in the eye, or the unnatural vitality of a hostess during long evenings. Yet they speak in allusion rather than accusation. The language is careful. She seems brighter than usual. He has never looked so alert. One wonders how they endure so tirelessly. Each statement hints but never exposes. The social code demands indirectness, even in judgment. To speak plainly would risk scandal, and scandal is unacceptable in polite society. C0caine thrives within this structure. The very secrecy that protects reputation also shields reliance. A lady may be praised for her charm late into the night, a gentleman lauded for his unflagging energy during debate. The whispers acknowledge excellence without understanding its source. The drug's presence is inferred only by exceptional performance, yet no one articulates the truth that vitality has been chemically enhanced, that composure has been artificially maintained. The powder's effects are invisible because the society that observes them is structured to value appearance above reality. In private chambers, the effect is equally insidious. Users overhear these whispers, and the admiration reinforces dependence. "You are remarkable," someone comments. "How do you manage it?" The answer is never spoken aloud. The powder is responsible. The user feels proud, validated, justified. To question reliance would be to question talent itself, to expose a secret that would bring shame. Thus, whispers become both mirror and cage, reflecting excellence while ensnaring the chemically sustained. Servants, too, play a subtle role in these hidden narratives. They notice patterns of behavior, late-night activity, early rising, changes in appetite, or restlessness. Yet their observations remain largely silent, constrained by hierarchy, discretion, and fear. The house itself becomes an accomplice. Doors closed, curtains drawn, stairs muffled under rugs. The private rhythms of dependency unfold unnoticed, while society's gaze is directed only toward performance. Even medical practitioners are drawn into the quiet conspiracy. Patients may report minor fatigue or anxiety, and doctors respond with reinforcement rather than interrogation. A small dose is prescribed, another recommended. Success is noted. No one asks whether the remedy is sustaining dependency, only whether it restores function. The whispers, muted by trust and propriety, allow the cycle to persist without challenge. In salons and studies, conversations are layered. Words praise intelligence, stamina, and charm, while shadows hint at something unspoken. Those who succeed chemically are admired. Those who cannot keep pace are quietly marginalized. C0caine, by amplifying the qualities society values most, ensures that the substance remains hidden behind whispers, even as its users become increasingly reliant. And so, the pattern continues. Energy maintained, appearances preserved, whispers circulating, judgment withheld. C0caine thrives in the interstices of discretion and admiration, feeding dependence while remaining unseen. Behind every polite comment, every gentle observation, lies a subtle acknowledgement of the powder's presence, even if unspoken. In Victorian London, these whispered suspicions, always partial, never confirmed, allow the most dangerous dependency to flourish unnoticed, unchallenged, and unbroken. Even the most confident practitioners can falter when faced with the unexpected. Victorian medicine, awash in discoveries and new chemical marvels, had long embraced the notion that progress could be measured, controlled, and contained. C0caine, praised for its precision, its ability to sharpen the mind and steady the nerves, seemed the epitome of scientific triumph. For decades, it had been embraced without hesitation. Doctors recommended it, chemists dispensed it, and society consumed it, trusting that the authority of science ensured safety. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, doubt began to creep into the laboratories, the consulting rooms, and the whispered reports of practitioners. The first signs are subtle. Patients who once responded predictably begin to demand increasing doses. Symptoms persist or intensify despite regular use. Insomnia, irritability, tremors, and anxiety appear in patients who, on the surface, seem composed, productive, and socially flawless. Physicians, initially confident that dosage adjustments or supportive measures could resolve these anomalies, find themselves facing evidence that challenges previous assumptions. Cocaine, it seems, is not as controllable as once believed. Colleagues exchange cautious remarks in private, a raised eyebrow over a patient's repeated requests, a subtle warning about the symptoms emerging in otherwise admirable clients. Journals begin to feature case reports describing dependence, restlessness, and the sometimes violent consequences of overuse. The language is careful, measured. Physicians are reluctant to openly condemn a substance long celebrated as a modern miracle. Yet the undertone is unmistakable. All may not be as it seems. Even self-experimentation, once a source of pride, becomes troubling. Doctors who had tested cocaine on themselves to validate its benefits begin to notice persistent agitation, sleepless nights, and diminished appetite. What was once exhilarating now hints at imbalance. These men, trained to observe, begin to recognize patterns that were previously rationalized as temperament, fatigue, or personal eccentricity. The very reliability of the substance comes into question. Yet skepticism is difficult in an environment invested in progress. Cocaine had been presented as a tool for control, a chemical ally to maintain the efficiency, composure, and intellect prized by Victorian culture. To doubt it is to challenge not merely the substance, but the confidence of the practitioner, the authority of the profession, and the morality of the era itself. Publicly acknowledging harm could invite ridicule, threaten reputation, or undermine trust in medicine. Therefore, doubt is tempered, discussed quietly, and often countered with rationalizations. The problem lies not in the drug, but in misuse, temperament, or failure to follow proper guidance. This cautious skepticism produces a curious consequence. The illusion of mastery is preserved, even as awareness of danger grows. Physicians may quietly adjust doses, restrict recommendations, or note cases of concern in private records, but they rarely intervene openly. Cocaine's reputation remains largely intact because the evidence of harm is gradual, subtle, and socially invisible. The very factors that allowed the powder to flourish, discretion, social approval, chemical efficacy, now shield it from scrutiny even as practitioners recognize its limitations. Patients, unaware of this emerging doubt, continue to rely upon the powder. They feel validated, encouraged, and justified by prior endorsements. The increasing tolerance, dependency, and physiological strain that accompany continued use are dismissed as ordinary fatigue or the cost of ambition. By the time the first signs of serious decline are visible, the network of concealment, social expectation, medical reassurance, chemical efficacy ensures that awareness is belated, fragmented, and incomplete. Thus begins the quiet reckoning of Victorian medicine. Even those most invested in control and rational authority are forced to confront a simple truth. Some substances cannot be mastered entirely. Cocaine, long celebrated as a miracle of modern chemistry, challenges the very assumptions of efficacy, safety, and moral propriety that had allowed it to flourish. In laboratories, consulting rooms, and whispered conversations, medicine begins to doubt, though the city, the salons, and the drawing rooms continue, oblivious, to celebrate the brilliance it sustains. The remedies offered are precise, measured, and polite. Victorian medicine, confident in its ability to regulate bodies and minds, responds to dependency with treatments that reflect the values of the age: discretion, propriety, and controlled intervention. Cocaine is not seen as a corrupting force, but as a chemical anomaly to be managed rather than condemned. Physicians attempt to impose order, relying on protocols, doses, and moral suasion. Yet in the quiet chambers of the elite, these measures often falter. Treatment begins with reassurance. Patients are advised to moderate use, to reduce doses incrementally, to retreat temporarily into rest. Physicians prescribe supporting tonics, mixtures of herbs, stimulants, and mild sedatives intended to soothe nerves while easing chemical reliance. Specialists recommend changes in routine, diet, and exercise, all designed to restore equilibrium. Yet these interventions assume a rational compliance that the powder itself has already undermined. Many patients comply, at least outwardly, while privately compensating. A reduced dose in the morning may be offset by an unsanctioned line at noon. A withdrawal from social gatherings is mitigated by clandestine consumption in private. The social expectations of energy, attention, and charm continue to press upon them, and cocaine ensures they can meet these demands. The treatments offered by physicians, however meticulously calculated, cannot reconcile the chemical imperative with the social one. Rest cures, hailed by some doctors as the pinnacle of rational treatment, often fail spectacularly. Patients are sent to country estates, secluded hotels, or sanatoriums designed to impose quiet and slow the pace of life. Yet the withdrawal from stimulation is harsh. Anxiety intensifies, sleep fragments further, appetite fluctuates erratically. The mind, conditioned to chemical urgency, resists stillness. Those who once moved effortlessly through salons and studies now lie restless in bed, their bodies demanding the very powder that they are forbidden. Success in public, previously guaranteed, becomes impossible without subterfuge. The social class of the addicted exacerbates the difficulty. Elite patients are accustomed to influence and control. They resist the imposition of strict oversight. A wealthy gentleman refuses total confinement. A lady evades supervision with careful timing. They navigate treatment with cunning, sustaining appearance, while secretly satisfying the craving that has become inseparable from their daily performance. The very privileges that protect their social standing obstruct the efficacy of treatment. Physicians are frustrated, yet constrained. Open censure risks social rupture. Scandal could undermine professional authority. Discretion is paramount, and the culture of polite denial shields both practitioner and patient. Reports of failed treatment circulate quietly in journals and personal correspondence, couched in euphemism. Persistent symptoms, relapse, variable compliance. Rarely is the full truth acknowledged, that the powder continues to dominate lives precisely because the social and professional environments demand its use. Psychologically, the failures reinforce dependence. Patients interpret unsuccessful withdrawal not as evidence of chemical control, but as proof of their own vulnerability to fatigue, stress, or social expectation. They resume use, now with heightened justification. If the cure fails, the original reliance is validated. The treatments, intended to liberate, inadvertently strengthen the cycle. Cocaine, meanwhile, continues to work its quiet alchemy. It maintains charm, focus, and composure, even as the body and mind deteriorate. Its success in sustaining appearances masks failure in restoring autonomy. The powder becomes a secret ally, a hidden scaffold under lives that are increasingly impossible to sustain without it. And so, within the discreet confines of London's elite, medicine discovers a truth it cannot easily confront. Brilliance, charm, and social mastery can be chemically maintained, but independence, true control over one's body and mind, remains elusive. Cocaine does not leave traces in the gutter. It does not announce itself with smoke, argument, or collapse. There are no denizens of the streets to draw attention, no public debauchery to scandalize the city. Yet within the polished halls of Victorian London, crime begins to unfold not with violence or vulgarity, but quietly, subtly, and invisibly. This is the crime of excess hidden behind propriety, the slow erosion of judgment, morality, and financial security, facilitated by a powder that maintains appearances while undermining self-control. Men of business and influence are among the first to encounter it. A banker, already stretched by ledgers and transactions, finds that cocaine sharpens his mind in ways both intoxicating and perilous. Decisions arrive more quickly, calculations feel infallible, and confidence swells. But confidence, when chemically enhanced, carries a danger. Risk is underestimated, caution is overlooked. Speculative ventures expand beyond prudence. Investments once measured become audacious gambles. Minor errors escalate into losses, yet the outward composure remains intact, concealing both misjudgment and consequence. The crime is rarely recognized as such. Society admires the appearance of competence, speed, and decisiveness. Financial errors are attributed to market volatility, social missteps to personality quirks, exhaustion to ambition. The chemical driver behind these lapses remains invisible, hidden behind the mask of intelligence and poise. Those who might question or intervene, partners, colleagues, family, are often seduced by the very brilliance cocaine sustains. Performance validates the means. Among women of society, similar patterns emerge, though in subtler form. A mother overspends on household luxuries to maintain the appearance of abundance. A hostess invests beyond her means to ensure perfect soirees. A lady engages in gambling or speculation discreetly to sustain social standing. Each act is calculated, defended, and socially justified. Yet, each carries consequences. Debts grow, reputations teeter, and minor lapses in judgment accumulate into significant breaches. The powder maintains grace and composure even as financial or social equilibrium begins to fracture. Legal entanglements follow quietly. Laws are broken not in public, but through subtle manipulations of contracts, accounts, or obligations. A letter overlooked, a promise mismanaged, a transaction misjudged, each becomes a microcosm of crime facilitated by chemical stimulation. The actors rarely perceive themselves as criminals. They are merely performing at a level society demands. The line between necessary action and transgression blurs, and cocaine ensures that their execution is flawless, leaving only traces of misfortune rather than visible chaos. Psychologically, the powder reinforces this behavior. Impulse is sharpened, judgment compressed into immediate decisions, and confidence magnified. The user feels capable, righteous, and justified. Risk is not avoided, it is calculated with chemical certainty. The exhilaration of competence, amplified by stimulation, overrides caution. Minor breaches, repeated over time, compound into systemic failures that remain hidden beneath meticulous appearances. Even medical guidance and societal norms conspire to obscure recognition. Prescriptions, tonics, and assurances frame continued use as rational, controlled, and virtuous. Social admiration shields errors. The very traits that cocaine enhances energy, focus, charm become proof of propriety, even as those traits are exploited to commit infractions invisible to the untrained eye. Thus, crime in Victorian London becomes a paradox. It exists not in dark alleys, but in bright drawing rooms. Not in drunken disorder, but in polished performance. Not in vulgar exposure, but in precision. Cocaine enables brilliance, conceals excess, and masks consequence. The city sees only competence, charm, and energy, while beneath the surface, morality, prudence, and judgment quietly erode. And in this quiet theatre of refinement, the powder orchestrates its most insidious crime, the corruption of virtue without a single raised eyebrow. For decades, cocaine's presence in Victorian society has been unremarkable, hidden behind the polished veneer of propriety and refinement. Its use is discreet, discreetly praised, and rarely questioned. Yet even the most invisible habits eventually invite attention. and the press, hungry for novelty, scandal, and moral instruction, begins to stir. Whispers that once circulated behind closed doors now leak into columns, cautiously at first, and then with increasing insistence. Victorian London, ever vigilant about appearances, must begin to reckon with a new, quiet scandal. The powder that had sustained brilliance now demands public acknowledgement. The earliest reports are tentative, framed in euphemism. Newspapers write of nervous ailments plaguing the social elite, of remedies that promise restoration of energy and calm. Letters to editors describe overdoses and peculiar behaviors, though they stop short of naming cocaine outright. Observant readers sense the subtext, that the miraculous stimulant once praised in medical journals is creating consequences behind the delicate curtains of refinement. Yet the ambiguity allows society to interpret these stories as curiosity rather than crisis. The powder remains invisible, the warnings muted by style and suggestion. Editorials begin to question propriety. Gentle admonitions appear. A doctor cited for excessive prescriptions. A hostess observed with unusual vivacity. A gentleman whose energy exceeds expectation. Yet the language is careful, indirect. Terms like overstimulation, nervous strain, and excessive tonics dominate, avoiding the clarity of accusation. Victorian decorum resists naming names, lest it shame the innocent or unsettle social equilibrium. The press is constrained by manners, even as it seeks to illuminate. The public reacts with fascination and moral anxiety. Readers are both titillated and alarmed. Could the brilliance, composure, and energy they admire in their peers be chemically sustained? Letters pour in, expressing concern for the young, admiration tinged with suspicion for the socially prominent, and curiosity about the limits of modern medicine. Coffeehouses and drawing rooms buzz with speculation. Conversation dances between intrigue and censure, all under the protective guise of discretion. Yet these early exposures do not halt use. On the contrary, visibility heightens allure. The powder becomes both dangerous and fashionable, secret and coveted. To be capable, tireless, and socially impeccable in the face of scrutiny transforms cocaine into a symbol of mastery, a badge of privilege, intellect, and endurance. The press, by acknowledging it indirectly, inadvertently amplifies its prestige. Observation of peers using the substance reinforces desire, while ambiguity preserves the illusion of control. Medical authorities respond with mixed reactions. Some advocate caution, highlighting documented dependence and physiological strain. Others defend its use, citing centuries of careful application in controlled doses and praising its role in sustaining duty and productivity. Victorian medicine, invested in appearing rational and progressive, hedges between warning and endorsement. In private journals, physicians debate the morality and safety of the drug. In public, they frame discourse with restraint, allowing only partial acknowledgement of harm. The dynamic is paradoxical. Exposure brings both scrutiny and prestige. Cocaine is now the subject of whispered fascination and cautious reporting, yet its users continue to rely upon it, emboldened by the attention. Society begins to recognize that brilliance and composure, once thought natural, may be chemically supported. The press cracks the silence, but in doing so, it heightens desire, envy, and the subtle competition for perfection. By the time Victorian London collectively acknowledges the powder's presence, its power is already entrenched. Dependence, hidden behind manners and achievement, flourishes beneath observation. The public sees energy, charm, and intellect. It rarely sees the fatigue, the reliance, or the subtle erosion of body and mind. The silence may be broken, but the illusion endures. Cocaine, as ever, remains invisible in the ways that matter most, while the city debates its morality and wonders which brilliant figures may be walking the delicate line between mastery and ruin. The mind, in Victorian thought, is the measure of civilization. Intellect defines worth, judgment shapes reputation, and mental clarity is prized above all. In a society obsessed with order, productivity, and propriety, the ability to think rapidly, recall details flawlessly, and articulate ideas with precision is not merely admired, it is essential. C0caine, arriving quietly into this milieu, offers an unprecedented promise to enhance cognition, sharpen attention, and sustain intellectual performance without the visible drawbacks of other stimulants. Yet beneath this promise, it begins to reshape the very consciousness it touches. At first, the effects are subtle, almost imperceptible. Thoughts feel lighter, connections between ideas more immediate, focus more intense. Writers describe sentences flowing effortlessly. Scholars discover unusual clarity when passing complex arguments. Debaters and lecturers find their energy and eloquence sustained through hours that would previously have worn down body and mind. The drug reinforces confidence, allowing intellectual labor to extend beyond natural limits. For the Victorian elite, this is nothing short of miraculous. Yet the clarity is a paradoxical one. C0caine accelerates thought, but it does not slow time for reflection. Ideas form rapidly, but rarely pause to fully develop. Connections feel intuitive, yet may be superficial. Memory sharpens selectively, privileging what is immediately useful over what is considered or nuanced. The mind is focused, but it is also narrowed, conditioned to operate in a heightened state where speed outweighs subtlety. Insight is amplified, but intuition is distorted. The Victorian ideal of reasoned judgment becomes intertwined with chemical urgency. Social reinforcement compounds the effect. Praise from peers, admiration from colleagues, and recognition for swift intellect encourage repeated use. Success validates reliance. If brilliance is observed and celebrated, it is natural to assume that the method is sound. In salons and studies, chemical stimulation is interpreted as innate genius rather than intervention. The mind, conditioned to seek approval and maintain reputation, adapts to the new baseline. Dependence emerges not as visible compulsion, but as a quiet alignment of need with societal expectation. Psychological tension accompanies this reliance. Without the powder, thoughts may drift, focus falters, and confidence wanes. The mind interprets ordinary fatigue as failure, ordinary hesitation as inadequacy. Anxiety grows in silence, often unspoken and unexamined. Each dose is justified as necessary, not indulgent. The chemical state becomes the norm. Ordinary consciousness feels deficient. To pause or abstain is to risk the collapse of social performance, intellectual authority, and self-perception. Physicians of the era recognize some of these patterns but struggle to define them. Reports of agitation, insomnia, and psychological strain appear in journals, yet they are often framed as results of temperament, overwork, or nervous exhaustion. The connection to repeated chemical stimulation is subtle, hidden beneath layers of social expectation, medical rationalization, and personal denial. The mind's transformation remains largely invisible, remarkable for the performance it produces, dangerous in the costs it conceals. C0caine, in this context, becomes both enhancement and enslavement. It preserves the appearance of genius while quietly reshaping the mind's natural rhythms. Thought is sharpened, but reflection narrows. Focus is sustained, but intuition falters. The Victorian ideal of mastery is reinforced by chemical support, blurring the line between discipline and dependency. What appears brilliance is often merely the powder's influence, yet society interprets it as merit. Thus, the Victorian mind, conditioned by ambition, expectation, and propriety, becomes entwined with the powder's promise. It performs flawlessly under observation, yet struggles silently in private. Each success reinforces reliance. Each moment of ordinary fatigue amplifies anxiety, and the boundaries between natural ability and chemical augmentation dissolve. Cocaine shapes cognition in subtle, profound, and invisible ways, producing intellect without pause, clarity without reflection, and brilliance that masks the slow, unrelenting cost beneath. Victorian London prizes appearances above all else. Composure, charm, intellect, and energy are the currency of social exchange, a carefully maintained ledger that defines status, influence, and moral authority. For decades, cocaine has worked silently beneath this system, sustaining brilliance, composure, and tireless effort. It allows women to host seamlessly, men to debate endlessly, and intellectuals to produce with precision. Yet even the most resilient facade cannot withstand subtle erosion indefinitely. As dependence deepens, cracks begin to form, and respectability, the very mask the powder preserves, begins to crumble. The signs are rarely dramatic. There is no public collapse, no drunken spectacle, no street-side shame. Instead, deterioration manifests in small, almost imperceptible ways. The hostess who once greeted guests with effortless charm now displays fleeting irritability when conversation turns unfamiliar. The gentleman whose focus never wavered begins to miscalculate, overlooking minor details in accounts or correspondence. The scholar producing rapid, brilliant prose occasionally lapses into repetition or incoherence, though outward appearances suggest mastery continues. These micro-failures, invisible to casual observation, accumulate into patterns of deviation that society cannot ignore for long. Whispers begin to circulate. The salons and clubs, previously arenas of admiration, now become stages for subtle judgment. "She seems distracted tonight," a friend remarks, eyes cast toward a tremor in hand or a slight falter in laughter. "He appears unusually restless," another notes, interpreting jittered gestures as mere temperament. The language is careful, veiled by the politeness of etiquette, yet the meaning is unmistakable. Something has shifted. The polished exterior is beginning to show the faint outlines of strain. Social reinforcement, once the ally of cocaine's invisibility, now acts as an amplifier of pressure. Individuals, aware that minor lapses are being noticed, push harder to maintain appearances. Doses increase, nights grow longer, appetite diminishes further. Insomnia becomes routine, yet the performance remains polished. Energy is sustained by chemical support, but the cost grows invisible only to the untrained eye. Friends and colleagues applaud continued composure while missing the underlying fragility. Financial and professional pressures compound the collapse. Men of influence misjudge transactions under overstimulation, women overspend to maintain appearances, and intellectuals sacrifice reflection for speed. These errors are often rationalized or hidden, but they mark the first erosion of authority, credibility, and respectability. Cocaine's promise of perfection begins to falter precisely where its use is most embedded, within the very arenas where society measures worth. Medical practitioners, confronted with these emerging patterns, respond inconsistently. Some note agitation, insomnia, and signs of dependence in journals and case reports, yet hesitate to issue strong warnings, constrained by social propriety and fear of scandal. Others continue to advocate measured use, framing continued dependence as acceptable management of nerves and energy. The powder's authority, validated by science and social expectation, shields its users from recognition of their own decline. Psychologically, the users themselves struggle to reconcile performance with strain. The facade of energy and control convinces them that they remain virtuous, capable, and composed. Private moments of anxiety, exhaustion, or irritability are rationalized as temporary or external rather than chemical. Dependence becomes normalized, celebrated even, as long as appearances are sustained. Yet each success reinforces the need for stimulation. creating a feedback loop that deepens both reliance and fragility. Thus, respectability begins to crumble, not in spectacle, but in subtle erosion. The smiles remain, the gestures precise, the conversation polished. The city observes brilliance, charm, and composure. But beneath this meticulously maintained exterior, the foundations of health, judgment, and autonomy weaken. C0caine, the invisible ally of Victorian propriety, ensures that decline remains hidden even as it grows unavoidable, proving that even the most disciplined façades are ultimately vulnerable to chemical support and the relentless demands of social expectation. The powder that once promised refinement now whispers of danger. C0caine, long celebrated for its ability to sustain energy, composure, and brilliance, begins to evoke unease. What was fashionable, even admired, is now tinged with suspicion. Society, which prizes appearances above all else, notices subtle shifts: the tremor in a hand, the sleepless countenance, the slightly too sharp glance behind polite smiles. The very qualities once lauded as evidence of refinement now inspire fear of moral corruption, of dependence, of hidden decline. It begins quietly. Conversations in drawing rooms grow tense. Observers remark on overbright eyes, on gestures a touch too precise, on hosts who command energy beyond natural limits. Comments are veiled. "She seems strained tonight." "He appears unusually agitated." One wonders how long such brilliance can last. These murmurs, though couched in discretion, carry the weight of unease. The social fabric, carefully maintained, senses that a line has been crossed between mastery and artifice. The intellectual and professional elite are among the first to be scrutinized. Writers, scholars, and professionals who once dazzled now reveal minor lapses, sentences that falter under pressure, miscalculations in accounts, impatience where careful deliberation once prevailed. Though outwardly controlled, their overextension hints at reliance. The powder, once invisible, now becomes an unspoken explanation, understood in private whispers, but never named publicly. Fear begins to mingle with admiration. Women, too, are implicated in the shift. Ladies of society, previously celebrated for tireless charm and social dexterity, now display signs of strain: restless gestures, tremulous smiles, fleeting irritability in conversation. Even as they maintain appearances, peers begin to question the source of such sustained composure. Curiosity mixes with caution, admiration with anxiety. The very tools that allowed them to manage domestic, social, and emotional labor become suspect. Medical authorities respond with increasing alarm, though publicly they remain measured. Journals publish case reports of dependency, insomnia, and psychological strain. Letters describe nervous collapse, agitation, and subtle physiological decline. Physicians debate treatment strategies: gradual reduction, rest, or supportive tonics. They recognize, with growing concern, that the chemical ally once embraced as a boon is now undermining the very minds it was meant to sustain. Yet, professional discretion prevents open denunciation. The powder's cultural respectability shields it even as the danger becomes apparent. Public awareness, too, begins to rise. Newspapers hint at scandals, discuss excessive stimulation in polite terms, and report on unusual behaviors among the elite without naming C0caine directly. Gossip spreads, blending fascination with moral anxiety. The populace perceives brilliance, charm, and energy, yet wonders at the cost. What once seemed merely fashionable now carries an undercurrent of peril. Psychologically, the shift is destabilizing for users. Where once the powder provided confidence and composure, it now evokes unease and self-scrutiny. They recognize, in glimpses, the dependency it fosters, the strain it imposes, and the fragility it conceals. Yet social expectation, professional demand, and the pressure to maintain appearances compel continued use. The fear is acknowledged but ignored. Necessity overrides caution. Thus, Victorian London moves from admiration to apprehension. Cocaine, once the secret ally of refinement, becomes the quiet source of anxiety. Fashion gives way to fear, brilliance to suspicion, composure to trepidation. And in the drawing rooms, studies, and salons where the powder circulates, the very tools that allowed society to perform mastery begin to undermine it silently, invisibly, and irreversibly. The whispers grow louder. What was once confined to discreet observation, trembling hands behind lace curtains, restless glances over polished tables, extraordinary energy sustained through long nights begins to surface in conversation, journals, and, eventually, the press. Victorian London, a city steeped in decorum, morality, and rigid social codes, senses an anomaly. The powder that once enhanced brilliance and composure now prompts fear of dependency, of corruption, and of a society quietly eroding from within. What begins as private concern blossoms into moral panic. At first, the alarm is subtle. Letters to editors inquire about nervous remedies and modern stimulants. Journalists publish cautious reports on unusual behaviors among the elite, couching their observations in euphemism. Words such as overstimulation, nervous strain, and excessive tonics circulate, hinting at consequences without naming the culprit. The Victorian mind, ever wary of scandal, interprets these signs as cautionary tales, a gentle reminder that indulgence, even in refinement, may carry peril. Yet even this limited exposure fuels curiosity and anxiety in equal measure. Social discourse follows. Conversations in drawing rooms, private clubs, and salons shift from admiration of tireless hosts and brilliant men of letters to speculation about what enables such perfection. Is it discipline, genius, or something else? Mothers discuss daughters who appear excessively energetic. Fathers note sons who seem unnaturally alert. Gossip, constrained by etiquette, spreads the sense that society's most respected individuals may rely on something unspoken to maintain appearances. Fear creeps into admiration. Physicians, caught between professional discretion and mounting evidence, begin to voice concern more openly, though still carefully. Case studies highlight insomnia, irritability, tremors, and other signs of chemical dependence. Letters in medical journals describe patients whose intellect, energy, and composure mask growing fragility. Some doctors advocate cautious reduction of doses, rest, or supportive tonics. Others continue to defend measured use, emphasizing observed benefits. The debate itself signals the emergence of a broader recognition that the chemical ally of refinement may also be a source of harm. The moral panic spreads into education and youth culture. Stories circulate of young men and women experimenting in private, attempting to emulate the vigor and charm of their elders. Concerned parents and educators warn of the dangers of stimulants, linking them to moral corruption, social impropriety, and physical decline. The anxiety is less about visible excess and more about the invisible consequences: addiction, degradation, and the destabilization of the social hierarchy itself. Yet the panic is paradoxical. Awareness increases both fear and fascination. The powder, once discreet and private, gains a new aura. It is dangerous precisely because it is effective, invisible, and socially sanctioned. People admire the energy, clarity, and composure it produces, even as they fear the dependence it conceals. Social emulation intensifies, compounding anxiety, while users themselves remain reluctant to abandon what has become essential for maintaining appearances. By the time moral concern is widely recognized, cocaine is already deeply entrenched. Its effects are both celebrated and feared, a source of admiration and anxiety, utility and risk. Victorian society stands at the precipice. The powder that once symbolized progress and refinement now embodies the tension between appearance and reality, ambition and dependency, propriety and peril. In salons, studies, and laboratories, the moral panic awakens, but the substance at its center continues to operate quietly, invisibly, and irresistibly, sustaining brilliance while quietly eroding the very foundations it appears to uphold. Even in a society governed by propriety, law eventually seeks to intervene. For decades, cocaine had circulated through Victorian London with little oversight, its influence masked by discretion, social approval, and the authority of medical professionals. Yet, as whispers grew into concern, as the moral panic deepened, and as the invisible decline became increasingly visible to some, regulatory action could no longer be ignored. Parliament, the medical establishment, and the press converged, hesitant, cautious, but increasingly insistent that something must be done to control a substance whose use had spread from discreet parlor indulgence into widespread dependency. The first legislative attempts are careful and limited. Early acts focus not on outright prohibition, but on documentation, distribution, and access. Pharmacies are instructed to maintain records, to limit quantities dispensed, and to observe the customary prudence of professional conduct. Physicians are reminded of their duty to exercise judgment in prescribing, balancing benefit against risk. The language is deliberate, measured, circumspect, and deferential to the authority of medicine. Cocaine is not vilified outright. It is framed as a powerful agent requiring careful stewardship. Yet, enforcement proves difficult. The elite, accustomed to discretion and privilege, navigate these early regulations with ease. Recipes are altered, doses divided, purchases spread across multiple chemists. Social networks provide cover, recommendations, introductions, and trusted confidants maintain supply lines invisible to official oversight. The very qualities that enabled cocaine's seamless integration into polite society, privacy, respectability, and chemical efficiency also render regulation almost impossible. Physicians respond with mixed reactions. Some embrace the guidelines, adjusting prescriptions and advocating cautious reduction for habitual users. Others resist, arguing that the benefits outweigh potential risks and that interference could harm patients reliant on the stimulant to meet social, professional, or domestic obligations. Journals debate these positions, emphasizing either the necessity of oversight or the autonomy of the practitioner. Within these pages, the tension between public safety and private discretion is codified, debated, and defended. The social impact is immediate. Users, now aware of scrutiny, adjust behavior to maintain appearances while continuing consumption. The powder is administered with even greater subtlety, hidden more carefully, and justified more insistently. Consumption becomes a private contract between the individual and their own ambition, with legality functioning as a distant, abstract constraint rather than a practical limitation. The drama of public law reinforces the thrill of private mastery. The powder remains indispensable precisely because oversight exists in theory, but is unenforceable in practice. Yet the existence of regulation signals something more profound: acknowledgement. For the first time, the state, medical authorities, and social institutions collectively recognize that cocaine is neither entirely safe nor entirely innocuous. It carries risk, dependency, and consequences previously ignored or rationalized. Moral panic has translated into legal acknowledgement. The powder's invisible influence, once shielded by fashion and propriety, is now the subject of scrutiny, even if superficial and incomplete. This partial oversight produces paradoxical effects. Awareness and regulation intensify both fear and fascination. The elite continue use with stealth and precision, while the wider public debates morality, health, and propriety. Cocaine becomes simultaneously forbidden and admired, dangerous and desirable, socially sanctioned and legally constrained. Dependence persists, yet it is now accompanied by the thrill of subtle transgression, a chemical rebellion contained within the bounds of legality. Thus, regulation arrives not as a cure, but as acknowledgement. Cocaine remains entrenched, invisible in its influence yet recognized in principle. Victorian London confronts the tension between authority and discretion, legality and secrecy, moral expectation and chemical enhancement. The powder continues to sustain brilliance, charm, and energy, while quietly undermining the very faculties it appears to preserve, leaving society to balance admiration, fear, and law in equal measure. Even the most esteemed physicians are not immune to scrutiny. Victorian medicine, long a bastion of authority, now finds itself under public and professional examination. Cocaine, once celebrated as a marvel of modern science, has revealed a darker side. Dependency, nervous collapse, and subtle yet pervasive decline among the elite. Questions arise not only about the substance, but about those entrusted with its dispensation. Were doctors complicit in harm? Were they negligent, enthusiastic, or merely blind to consequences? In the quiet corridors of medical society, and in the growing attention of the press, physicians find themselves on trial. The proceedings are not dramatic in the sense of courtroom spectacle. They unfold in journals, in lectures, and in whispers at conferences. Case studies are dissected with meticulous care. Patients who fatigue too quickly, nerves overstimulated, social composure maintained at chemical expense. Each detail is scrutinized. Letters describe practitioners who recommended repeated doses without clear understanding of long-term effect. Observers debate, was this reckless oversight, genuine ignorance, or a necessary response to the demands of Victorian society? Medical ethics, long unchallenged, faces a subtle but relentless pressure. Physicians had operated under the assumption that proper dosing, careful supervision, and trust in patient discretion were sufficient. Cocaine's rising influence undermines these assumptions. The very qualities that made it desirable, its invisibility, its capacity to sustain brilliance, also conceal its dangers, leaving the physician with the illusion of safety. When patients decline or relapse, when dependence becomes visible, the question of responsibility arises. The press amplifies the tension. Newspapers report, cautiously at first, on overzealous prescriptions and unexpected consequences among society's elite. Letters to the editors speculate on chemical influence, the moral implications of stimulant use, and the accountability of medical practitioners. Private correspondence between doctors circulated discreetly, debates professional competence, the ethics of recommendation, and the limits of scientific knowledge. Victorian society, ever attentive to propriety, judges in subtle ways, admiration tinged with unease, respect complicated by suspicion. For individual doctors, the scrutiny is both professional and personal. Those who pioneered cocaine's medical use must reconcile their past enthusiasm with emerging evidence of harm. Peer judgment is immediate, reputations at stake. Confidence gives way to caution, certainty to self-doubt. Yet the culture of secrecy that allowed cocaine to flourish simultaneously shields them. Patients' discretion, societal admiration, and the subtle invisibility of dependence insulate practitioners from outright censure. They are on trial, but the court is quiet, diffuse, and constrained by manners. The trials of conscience and reputation extend beyond immediate practice. Physicians are forced to reconsider the very foundations of their authority. The assumption that chemical intervention can be controlled, the belief that social pressures are irrelevant to physiological impact, and the notion that dependence is a matter of morality rather than biology. Professional debates in journals highlight these dilemmas, balancing scientific progress against ethical responsibility. Yet even as scrutiny intensifies, cocaine remains embedded in society. Dependence, admiration, and fear coexist. Doctors, constrained by propriety and curiosity, continue to prescribe, adjust, and observe, even as awareness of consequences grows. The powder, while raising questions about ethics and competence, continues to sustain brilliance, charm, and performance. Victorian medicine stands at a crossroads, authority-tested, morality-questioned, yet social expectation, chemical efficacy, and personal ambition ensure that the trials are complex, incomplete, and ongoing. In this subtle adjudication, Victorian doctors confront the paradox of their own creation, a substance that extends brilliance while eroding control, sustains appearance while undermining reality, and places practitioners on trial even as it preserves their prestige. The consequences are quiet, invisible, and profoundly human, a reflection not merely of medicine, but of the society it serves. Even the most polished drawing rooms cannot contain collapse indefinitely. Victorian society, with its strict codes of behavior, careful etiquette, and obsession with appearances, provided the perfect stage for cocaine's subtle influence. For years, the powder maintained brilliance, composure, and tireless energy, allowing men and women to perform the roles demanded of them with apparent ease. Yet every performance has its limits, and every mask eventually begins to falter. The fall from the drawing room is quiet, gradual, and almost imperceptible, a decline hidden beneath charm, manners, and the subtle rhythms of chemical dependence. It begins with fatigue that cannot be masked. The hostess, who once maintained tireless attention through long evenings, now feels moments of distraction that even the powder cannot fully erase. A gentleman, previously celebrated for wit and poise, misplaces words, hesitates in conversation, or falters when faced with an unexpected question. A scholar producing brilliant prose now repeats phrases or struggles to sustain the clarity that once seemed effortless. The cracks are minor, almost invisible, yet they accumulate. In a society trained to observe perfection, even slight deviation draws notice. Whispers circulate with increasing urgency. Guests comment, subtly, on distracted glances or tremors in posture. Friends speculate on unusually sharp or hollow laughter. Observers notice that the effortless energy they once admired now appears strained, almost artificial. The drawing room, once a theater of admiration, becomes a stage of tension, where composure is measured against chemical maintenance. Those who falter even slightly risk social judgment, gossip, and subtle ostracism. Financial, professional, and domestic consequences accompany the decline. Men miscalculate transactions or overreach in speculation, driven by the artificial confidence the powder once supplied. Women overspend to maintain appearances or push domestic performance beyond natural capacity. Intellectuals strain to meet deadlines and sustain brilliance, producing work that is technically correct but subtly diminished in insight. In every sphere, chemical reliance has allowed performance to continue longer than natural limits permit. Yet the underlying fragility now surfaces, threatening reputation and authority. Medical oversight, limited and cautious, provides minimal intervention. Physicians recognize dependence, yet often interpret lapses as fatigue, temperament, or excessive ambition, rather than chemical influence. Prescriptions continue, adjusted in minor doses or combined with tonics, meant to restore equilibrium. Advice is offered discreetly, without alarm, and the social and professional shields that protect the elite allow decline to remain largely invisible. Cocaine continues to maintain appearances even as the cost accumulates, delaying recognition of harm until it is pronounced. Psychologically, the fall is isolating. users struggle privately with anxiety, irritability, and insomnia. The energy they once relied upon feels insufficient without increasing doses. Their composure is sustained only through constant vigilance and chemical reinforcement. The discrepancy between internal experience and external performance grows, creating tension, frustration, and subtle despair. To admit dependence, even internally, would be to acknowledge vulnerability in a culture that prizes endurance above all else. And yet society applauds the performance. The fall is measured, discreet, and almost elegant. Observers perceive charm, intellect, and poise, even as they unconsciously register hints of strain. Appearances remain intact until collapse is undeniable. By then, the foundation beneath the drawing room's glittering floorboards, health, judgment, autonomy, has already eroded. The powder, which enabled brilliance and social mastery, has delayed recognition of decline, but cannot prevent it. Thus, the fall from the drawing room is a quiet tragedy, gradual, hidden, and inexorably tied to the very tools that created social and intellectual success. In Victorian London, brilliance persists even as vulnerability deepens, and the powder that sustained performance becomes both crutch and catalyst for an invisible, inevitable descent. For every figure who dazzles in the drawing rooms, salons, and offices of Victorian London, there are those left behind. Dependence on cocaine, while discreet and socially sanctioned among the elite, carries consequences that extend beyond the individual. Families, servants, colleagues, and social peers become witnesses, often unwilling to the subtle erosion of health, judgment, and composure. The powder maintains appearances for those who use it, but for others, the effects are tangible, unavoidable, and often heartbreaking. Children in households governed by stimulant-enhanced performance experience an unusual rhythm. Mothers, sustained by chemical alertness, rise early, orchestrate tasks with precision, and maintain a veneer of charm and patience. Fathers, similarly energized, exert discipline, manage business affairs, and attend social obligations with tireless attention. Yet beneath this apparent control lies strain. Children sense the subtle tremor in a hand, the tightness of a smile, the occasional flicker of irritability. They learn early to navigate adult expectations that are chemically heightened and socially enforced. Emotional reciprocity becomes imbalanced, affection is measured and performance-driven, dependency shapes interaction, subtly altering development and perception. Servants, too, witness the hidden toll. They observe tremors, sleepless nights, and unspoken tension. They notice that the powdered, calm, and tireless energy they see in their employers is not entirely natural. Yet in a society structured by hierarchy, they rarely intervene. Discretion is required. Speaking out could invite reprimand or dismissal. The servants bear silent witness, absorbing the stress of households stretched thin by chemical maintenance. They participate in sustaining the illusion, facilitating routines, managing schedules, and ensuring appearances remain unbroken. The invisible labor of the powder is mirrored by the invisible labor of those who support it. Friends and colleagues, once companions in admiration, begin to perceive subtle inconsistencies. Meetings that should run smoothly are punctuated by agitation or sudden lapses. Conversations that once sparkled with wit now show repetition or tension. The brilliance they admired is tinged with unease. Yet social expectation, politeness, and the culture of concealment prevent confrontation. Concern is expressed in euphemism, advice offered in hints, observation couched in discretion. Those left behind are caught in a liminal space, aware of danger, powerless to intervene, and obligated to maintain appearances themselves. The social consequences are compounded by emotional strain. Dependence and subtle decline produce tension, fear, and anxiety in those who share close quarters with the user. Witnessing the gradual erosion of a parent, spouse, or mentor produces quiet despair, often unacknowledged in a culture that prizes composure above all else. Relationships are reshaped. Admiration mixes with apprehension, trust with subtle doubt, intimacy with distance. The powder, though invisible in its direct effects, indirectly reconfigures the emotional landscape of households and social networks. Even financially, those left behind feel the impact. Miscalculations, overspending, and misjudged ventures, amplified by stimulant-enhanced overconfidence, may destabilize estates and businesses. Dependence, though private, produces consequences that ripple outward: debts, loss of credibility, and the quiet collapse of stability. The elite maintain composure in public, yet their families bear the hidden costs, navigating stress, secrecy, and social expectation in ways that are largely invisible to outsiders. Thus, the legacy of cocaine extends beyond individual consumption. The powder sustains brilliance and composure for the user, yet leaves a trail of fatigue, anxiety, and subtle dysfunction for those nearby. Victorian society applauds performance, admires refinement, and enforces appearances. Yet those left behind experience the shadow of dependence, the quiet erosion of human connection, and the invisible burden of sustaining façades that are chemically maintained. In this hidden network of consequence, brilliance comes at a cost, and the unseen victims are as numerous as those who continue to shine. Victorian science has long prided itself on mastery. The laboratories, journals, and lectures of London brim with confidence. Chemistry deciphers nature, medicine regulates the body, and observation promises understanding of the mind. Progress is measurable, knowledge accumulates, and the human will is assumed capable of directing both nature and nurture. Cocaine, for decades celebrated as a triumph of pharmacology, challenges this conviction. Its rise, widespread use, and the subtle collapse it precipitates force scientists and physicians to confront the limits of their discipline in ways previously unimagined. At first, confidence remains intact. The drug's immediate effects are undeniable: alertness, composure, stamina, and charm. It functions predictably in the short term, reinforcing belief in control. Doctors prescribe, chemists measure, and patients comply, all reassured by the apparent precision of chemical intervention. Journals publish case studies extolling benefits. The invisible decline is overlooked, rationalized, or attributed to temperament. Science, at this stage, feels sufficient. Dosage, observation, and social discretion appear to contain risk. Yet anomalies emerge, quietly but persistently. Patients, particularly those of high social standing, begin to show increasing tolerance, dependence, and psychological strain. Sleep eludes them, tremors appear, appetite diminishes, and subtle irritability intrudes, even during periods of apparent composure. Physicians note repeated requests for the substance, relapses during rest cures, and occasional miscalculations in judgment or social performance. These deviations challenge the assumption that chemistry alone can ensure safety, predictability, and virtuous use. Laboratories become arenas of reflection and debate. Chemists and physicians scrutinize compounds, compare results, and attempt to quantify tolerance, dependency, and physiological consequences. The observations reveal patterns previously invisible: cumulative strain, subtle erosion of cognitive and emotional stability, and the divergence between outward appearance and internal state. Despite meticulous measurement, science cannot fully account for the social, psychological, and cultural forces intertwined with chemical use. The powder's effects extend beyond physiology into expectation, prestige, and performance domains that resist simple quantification. The limitations provoke unease among medical authorities. How can one regulate a substance whose consequences are invisible, delayed, and socially reinforced. How can ethics, prudence, and scientific authority contend with private practice, societal expectation, and chemical enhancement? Journal articles grow cautious, presenting data alongside hypothetical warnings. Letters debate moral responsibility, dosage limits, and the interpretive challenges of observing patients whose brilliance masks dependency. Victorian science, confident in mastery, must now acknowledge uncertainty. Public discourse, amplified by newspapers and pamphlets, presses science further. Readers, aware of unusual behavior among the elite, demand explanation. Medical professionals respond with measured statements. The substance is safe when used properly, dangerous when abused. Yet the very definition of proper use is unstable, contingent on social norms, personal tolerance, and concealed habits. Science can describe effect, dose, and observation, but it cannot fully predict the human response shaped by ambition, expectation, or vanity. Psychologically, this confrontation is unsettling. Practitioners recognize that their authority has limits. Even the most disciplined dosing cannot guarantee safety or virtue. The powder, once a symbol of rational control, now appears partially autonomous, its influence mediated by social context, human desire, and private ambition. Victorian confidence in mastery over nature, mind, and morality falters. In this reckoning, science learns a bitter lesson. Knowledge is powerful, yet incomplete. Observation can measure effects, yet not fully anticipate dependence. Authority can prescribe, yet cannot enforce restraint. Cocaine, brilliant in its immediate promise, becomes a mirror reflecting the limits of Victorian confidence, revealing that even the most disciplined society cannot fully master the interaction of chemistry, ambition, and human frailty. The powder is no longer merely a tool, it is a challenge, a test of humility, and a reminder that mastery has bounds. The century turns, but the powder endures. As London moves from gaslight to electric bulbs, from horse-drawn carriages to iron rails and steam engines, society believes it has progressed, refined, and modernized. Yet amidst these transformations, cocaine remains quietly entrenched, its influence continuing to ripple through salons, studies, and laboratories. What began as a medical curiosity, embraced by the elite for stamina, charm, and intellect, persists into the new century not merely as a tool, but as a habit, a secret scaffolding upon which social and professional life still depends. The patterns of use, though now more widely recognized, are remarkably persistent. The powder continues to provide a veneer of brilliance, allowing men to sustain lengthy debates, manage enterprises, and navigate political machinations, while women maintain composure across social obligations and domestic labor. The substance, once exotic and novel, has become normalized. Its effects, alertness, charm, energy, are expected, demanded even, by a society conditioned to associate chemical assistance with refinement. New generations inherit the rhythms established by their predecessors, absorbing both the habit and the expectation without full awareness of its origins. Medical understanding, while improved, remains incomplete. Physicians of the new century recognize the risks. Insomnia, tremors, irritability, and psychological dependence are documented. Reports of repeated requests, subtle misjudgments, and cumulative strain appear in journals. Rest cures, dosage adjustments, and attempts at moderation are advised. Yet enforcement is limited, social discretion continues to shield usage, and cultural reinforcement ensures that the powder remains largely invisible. The substance is integrated into the daily performance of the elite, even as its dangers are quietly acknowledged. Society's admiration endures alongside its fear. Cocaine, while increasingly associated with dependency and moral concern, continues to confer social and professional advantage. The appearance of vitality, the projection of composure, and the sustained intellectual edge remain prized, incentivizing continued use. Reputation, opportunity, and success are often intertwined with chemical support. Those who abstain find themselves comparing their natural stamina with the chemically augmented abilities of peers, further reinforcing reliance. Cultural and generational transmission solidifies the powder's place. Young men and women, observing the tireless energy of parents, mentors, and social superiors, internalize the expectation that brilliance and charm are attainable but only with assistance. The allure of the powder persists, framed as necessity, refinement, and sophistication. Admiration for its effects obscures recognition of its costs. Dependency is normalized, invisibility reinforced, and the cycle continues. Psychologically, the persistence of use shapes ambition and self-perception. Those reliant upon the powder equate energy and clarity with worth and perceive ordinary fatigue as weakness. The baseline of performance is chemically elevated. Withdrawal becomes intolerable. Mental and physical strain is interpreted as the natural price of accomplishment, while the role of the substance itself remains unacknowledged. Even as society evolves, embracing new technologies, new standards, new knowledge, the powder maintains an unbroken presence, quietly dictating the pace of life, perception of capacity, and the definition of propriety. The new century, though heralded as modern and enlightened, cannot escape the shadows of the previous one. Cocaine, with its subtle blend of enhancement and concealment, continues to shape Victorian and Edwardian life alike. Brilliant appearances, tireless energy, and charm are preserved, yet at the cost of invisible dependence, quiet strain, and the slow erosion of natural limits. The powder endures as both symbol and substance, a relic of an era, yet a living force, reminding all that even as centuries turn, old addictions persist, woven invisibly into the fabric of ambition, expectation, and social performance. Victorian London, in its brilliance and ambition, seldom pauses to reflect. Its gaslit streets hum with commerce, its drawing rooms resonate with laughter and debate, and its institutions flourish under the weight of industry, intellect, and propriety. Yet beneath the polished veneer, subtle warnings have accumulated symptoms of dependence, whispers of strain, documented cases of fatigue, agitation, and moral compromise. The powder that once symbolized mastery, refinement, and control now offers a stark lesson. Brilliance maintained chemically carries hidden cost, and yet for decades these lessons are largely ignored. The warnings are present in journals, lectures, and private correspondence. Physicians note tremors, insomnia, irritability, and the subtle decline of patients who appear flawless in public. Chemists observe repeated requests and increasing doses, patterns suggestive of tolerance and dependence. Social commentators and journalists hint at moral compromise and the erosion of propriety. Each observation, however, is treated cautiously, framed in euphemism, and often dismissed or rationalized. The patterns are documented, but actionable insight is delayed by the conventions of discretion, hierarchy, and social expectation. Families, servants, and peers bear witness as well. Children notice subtle inconsistencies in maternal attention. Servants observe irregularities in schedule and composure. Colleagues detect lapses in judgment. These observers recognize consequences, yet they remain constrained by social hierarchy, propriety, and fear of scandal. Their reports are fragmented, anecdotal, and largely private. The collective lessons are ignored not out of negligence, but because the mechanisms of social accountability are entwined with secrecy and performance. Even medical authorities, faced with accumulating evidence, act cautiously. Partial regulation, professional admonishment, and cautious editorial discussion emerge, yet comprehensive intervention is rare. Social expectation, deference to authority, and the allure of performance continue to shield the elite from full accountability. The powder, by preserving appearances, undermines recognition of harm, allowing dependence to persist while its dangers are acknowledged only in theory. Victorian confidence in science and decorum compounds the problem. The appearance of control is taken as evidence of actual mastery. Psychologically, the users themselves fail to internalize the lesson. Success is interpreted as validation, not risk. Productivity, charm, and composure reinforce reliance rather than provoke reflection. When fatigue, irritability, or tremors appear, they are rationalized as stress, temperament, or ambition. Dependency becomes normalized because it sustains the very traits society admires. The powder, by maintaining outward brilliance, obscures its own cost. The consequences extend beyond the individual. Social norms, professional expectations, and familial obligations are all shaped by chemically sustained performance. Young observers emulate behavior, assuming that tireless energy and flawless composure are natural rather than chemically assisted. Generations inherit not only admiration for brilliance but also the unspoken prescription for chemical enhancement. The lessons, though present, are bypassed by convenience, desire, and the subtle rewards of continued performance. Thus, Victorian London repeats its pattern. Brilliant appearances persist, dependence deepens, and caution is deferred. Evidence of strain exists in journals, private observations, and social whispers. Yet the warnings are largely ignored. Chemistry sustains brilliance while masking cost. Propriety conceals consequence. The city continues to prize energy, composure, and intellect. Yet the powder quietly teaches what no one seems willing to learn, that mastery, artificially maintained, comes at the expense of natural limits, health, and autonomy. Victorian ambition, dazzled by its own reflection, turns away from these lessons, leaving the consequences to emerge gradually, invisibly, and inexorably. Victorian society, ever devoted to restraint and order, clings to the notion that indulgence can be managed. Even in the presence of a substance as potent and seductive as cocaine, the prevailing belief is that moderation is possible. The powder, praised for its ability to sustain composure, charm, and intellect, is framed as a tool, an enhancement to ambition, a support for nerves, a calculated indulgence that can be measured and contained. And yet, as use spreads across drawing rooms, studies, and salons, this assumption of control proves increasingly illusory. The myth of controlled pleasure emerges, promising mastery even as it conceals dependence. Initially, use appears manageable, a pinch before an evening gathering, a discreet dose before a lecture, a carefully measured supplement to a long day of social or professional obligation. The effects are precise: enhanced energy, sharpened thought, calm composure. Users feel capable, brilliant, and morally justified. The powder reinforces the very qualities society prizes: charm, attention, focus. Within this framework, control seems natural, reasonable, even virtuous. The myth is born. One may indulge without consequence, excel without compromise. But dependence is incremental and invisible. The body adapts, the mind adjusts, and the chemical scaffolding becomes essential rather than optional. What begins as enhancement becomes baseline. Ordinary energy feels insufficient. Fatigue is interpreted as failure. Composure is unsustainable without reinforcement. The myth persists because society rewards appearance, not authenticity. Performance is applauded, while reliance is invisible. Each act of indulgence reinforces the illusion that control remains intact. Victorian morality compounds the danger. Restraint, moderation, and duty are celebrated, and the powder is framed as a tool to uphold these ideals rather than subvert them. A gentleman may maintain composure at a meeting long past the natural limits of endurance. A lady may navigate social obligations flawlessly, masking exhaustion. Their brilliance is admired, yet the chemical basis remains invisible. Dependence is obscured by virtue, efficacy, and propriety. The myth is both social and psychological. To indulge is not to fail, but to succeed. Medical authority contributes to the deception. Physicians, constrained by propriety and bolstered by decades of prior endorsement, advise measured use. Small doses are recommended, temporary interventions justified. Case reports caution only vaguely, emphasizing occasional risk rather than inevitable consequence. The language is circumspect, harm is hypothetical, moderation achievable, duty paramount. Science appears to support control, even as reality demonstrates the opposite. Social imitation further entrenches the myth. Young men and women observe tireless energy, intellectual sharpness, and unflagging composure, and seek to emulate it. The powder becomes a private secret of success, a discreet yet essential component of social and professional life. Admiration validates use. Dependence is framed as skillful management rather than loss of autonomy. The myth spreads as users replicate patterns, sustaining appearances while internal strain accumulates. Ultimately, the myth of controlled pleasure is a paradox. Cocaine enables performance beyond natural limits, producing brilliance and charm admired by society, yet simultaneously fosters dependence, fatigue, and subtle erosion of judgment, the very qualities that conceal its danger. Efficiency, grace, composure, reinforce belief in control. Victorian London becomes a stage where the illusion of mastery thrives, masking the reality that chemical indulgence, no matter how measured, is rarely as controlled as it appears. The powder continues to sustain brilliance, but the myth ensures that those who rely upon it remain convinced of their own mastery, even as the cost accumulates quietly and invisibly beneath the surface. Victorian London prizes control, refinement, and appearances above all else. A lady's gestures must be measured, a gentleman's posture precise, and every movement, every glance, every smile subject to scrutiny. In this society, nothing is accidental, and everything is observed. Yet beneath the polished veneer of etiquette and propriety, cocaine exerts its influence, producing composure in public while eroding stability in private. The paradox becomes most visible in the juxtaposition of silk gloves and shaking hands. Outwardly, grace is maintained. Inwardly, reliance manifests as subtle, almost imperceptible tremors that hint at strain, fatigue, and dependency. The powder allows the body to perform beyond its natural limits. Hands that might tremble from exhaustion remain steady during long evenings, precise in gestures, capable of pouring tea, handling correspondence, or extending polite salutations without flaw. Eyes sparkle with alertness, lips curve into polished smiles, and the rhythm of conversation flows effortlessly. Observers admire these displays, noting composure, charm, and energy, never suspecting the chemical scaffolding beneath. The gloves of refinement conceal more than skin. They hide fatigue, strain, and trembling fingers that betray the body's quiet rebellion. Yet in private, the consequences of chemical enhancement are unavoidable. Tremors, subtle at first, become more frequent. Sleeplessness deepens, producing a jittery alertness that cannot be fully masked by etiquette. Hands that once moved with effortless precision now quiver in moments of stillness or stress. The body rebels quietly, revealing the cost of sustained brilliance. The user becomes a performer both dependent and aware, maintaining appearances while the nervous system wages a silent war. These physical manifestations are mirrored by psychological strain. Concentration, once enhanced, grows fragile without continued stimulation. Anxiety surges in private moments when the powder is unavailable or insufficient. The mind, accustomed to chemical support, interprets ordinary fatigue as failure and ordinary hesitation as moral or social inadequacy. Each tremor, each lapse in composure, reinforces reliance. The gloves of propriety conceal not only the hands but also the vulnerability of the mind beneath. Socially, the tension is invisible. Guests, colleagues, and family members perceive composure, energy, and charm, applauding stamina without recognizing the hidden effort required to sustain it. Compliments on grace and attentiveness reinforce usage. Dependence is normalized because it preserves what society values most: the outward performance of virtue, brilliance, and refinement. The powder, in effect, sustains not only the body, but the social illusion itself. Even medical oversight provides only partial guidance. Physicians note tremors, insomnia, and fatigue in journals, yet recommendations emphasize moderation and careful dosing rather than outright prohibition. Professional and social pressures reinforce use, creating a cycle in which chemical support is necessary to maintain appearances. The gloves conceal hands, propriety conceals cost. Success masks dependence. Thus, the image of Victorian perfection persists even as the body falters. Silk gloves remain polished, gestures remain elegant, and smiles remain poised, while trembling hands and strained nerves hint at the invisible price of brilliance. Cocaine enables performance, sustains energy, and masks decline, yet it cannot eliminate the subtle betrayals of the body and mind. In the quiet spaces behind drawing-room doors, the paradox of refinement unfolds. Perfection maintained chemically, tremors hidden beneath silk, and the illusion of control preserved even as reliance deepens. The powder continues its quiet work, sustaining appearances while slowly unraveling the natural resilience it purports to enhance. Cocaine, in its pale, precise form, became more than a substance in Victorian London. It was a mirror, reflecting the ambitions, anxieties, and contradictions of an empire at the height of its power. The powder embodied the very qualities Britain prized: industriousness, composure, intellect, and refinement. It promised mastery over the body and mind, enabling individuals to perform with tireless energy and unblemished charm. Yet, as it circulated among drawing rooms, studies, and laboratories, it revealed the empire's own vulnerabilities: dependence masked as discipline, brilliance sustained chemically, and the erosion of natural limits hidden beneath appearances. In households and social gatherings, cocaine reflected ambition in microcosm. Women, sustained through social obligations and domestic labor, became models of composure and charm, yet relied on chemical support to maintain energy and patience. Men, driving commerce, politics, and intellect, projected certainty, decisiveness, and stamina, all while masking the subtle strain of overextension. Intellectuals produced prose, arguments, and discoveries at a pace impossible without stimulation. The powder allowed society's elite to meet, and even exceed, the demands placed upon them, while concealing the personal cost. In this way, the powder mirrored the empire itself, outwardly robust, brilliant, and capable, yet internally stretched, vulnerable, and dependent on unseen forces. Physicians and chemists, complicit in the facilitation of this performance, also reflected imperial confidence and ambition. They administered, prescribed, and measured with meticulous care, believing in the rationality of intervention. Their authority lent legitimacy to use, reinforcing the notion that mastery was achievable, that ambition could be chemically supported. Yet the very expertise that produced control also concealed risk. The powder highlighted the limits of medical understanding, revealing that even science at the forefront of empire could not fully govern human dependency, temperament, or social expectation. Society, in turn, reflected its own contradictions through consumption. Applause and admiration were bestowed upon brilliance, composure, and tireless effort, while ignorance or denial masked reliance. Dependence was invisible because performance was maintained. The powder, unmarked and silent, allowed those in positions of influence to appear naturally capable. The empire, like its citizens, celebrated efficiency, control, and achievement, yet overlooked the subtle erosion beneath. Cocaine was both enabler and revealer, reflecting the duality of progress and vulnerability. The moral paradox deepened as the powder spread. What was initially a medical marvel and social aid became a silent test of limits. Dependence grew quietly. Physical and mental strain accumulated under the guise of propriety and refinement. Appearances of mastery reinforced reliance. Social admiration obscured cost, and private struggle remained hidden. The empire's obsession with perfection, productivity, and respectability was mirrored in each chemically sustained performance, even as the inherent fragility of individuals was revealed in private tremors, sleepless nights, and subtle lapses in judgment. Culturally, cocaine reflected both aspiration and fear. It embodied the desire to conquer limitation, to transcend fatigue, to perform flawlessly, and to embody the ideals of Victorian society. Simultaneously, it exposed the danger of overreach, the thin margin between brilliance and collapse, virtue and dependency, control and vulnerability. In each household, laboratory, and salon, the powder acted as a silent measure of capability, a chemical mirror in which ambition and fragility coexisted. Thus, cocaine became a symbol of the empire itself, outwardly confident, polished, and authoritative, yet quietly dependent upon unseen forces to sustain brilliance. It reflected a society obsessed with progress, refinement, and mastery, while revealing the vulnerabilities that underlay its greatest achievements. The powder did not merely enhance life, it illuminated it, showing in microcosm the paradoxes, ambitions, and silent costs of Victorian power, propriety, and expectation. At last, the fog begins to lift. Not the literal fog of London streets, curling around gas lamps and damp cobblestones, but the figurative fog that had obscured reality for decades, the haze of admiration, illusion, and chemical enhancement. Cocaine, once celebrated as a marvel of science and a marker of refinement, has long sustained brilliance, composure, and tireless effort. Yet even the most effective powder cannot indefinitely conceal dependence, fatigue, and the erosion of natural limits. The city begins, subtly and reluctantly, to perceive the consequences previously hidden behind charm, intellect, and propriety. The decline is gradual, almost imperceptible to outsiders, yet undeniable to those who live within it. Tremors in hands, subtle agitation, and insomnia betray reliance. Appetite wanes, skin pales, and once effortless energy falters in private. Intellectual output, previously sharp and rapid, begins to show cracks. Repetition, lapses in judgment, and errors overlooked by peers accustomed to performance. The powder that once seemed to promise mastery now exposes the fragility beneath sustained brilliance. Socially, the recognition is slow and uneven. In drawing rooms, salons, and offices, whispers shift from admiration to concern. She seems strained. He appears restless. Become common refrains. Gossip carries subtle warnings, cautioning observation rather than direct action. Yet, the cultural apparatus that once enabled concealment, politeness, hierarchy, discretion, still shields many from full exposure. The fog of propriety, though thinning, continues to obscure the most serious consequences. Medical authorities, previously confident in the rationality of controlled use, acknowledge limits. Journals publish case studies documenting dependence, agitation, and subtle deterioration. Physicians caution moderation, recommend rest, and debate the ethics of continued administration. Yet the very structures that allowed cocaine to flourish, professional discretion, social deference, and chemical efficacy, complicate intervention. The remedy remains embedded in society even as its dangers become increasingly apparent. Psychologically, the users experience tension, fear, and denial. Their brilliance, charm, and stamina, once regarded as natural virtues, are now understood, at least faintly, to be chemically sustained. Withdrawal, fatigue, and anxiety become intolerable reminders of dependence. Yet the social expectation to maintain appearances compels continued use, reinforcing a cycle of reliance even as awareness grows. The fog lifts for some, but for others it obscures self-recognition as effectively as ever. The broader city perceives lessons slowly. Newspapers, pamphlets, and letters discuss the dangers of stimulant use in cautious, euphemistic terms. Families, servants, and colleagues witness strain and subtle collapse, yet social and hierarchical constraints prevent overt confrontation. Cocaine, though recognized as a source of risk, remains entangled in the social, professional, and intellectual structures that demand performance. Recognition is partial, fragmented, and filtered through propriety. Ultimately, the lifting of the fog is incomplete. Victorian London continues to admire energy, composure, and intellect, even as it becomes aware of the costs behind these virtues. Cocaine's influence, both chemical and symbolic, leaves a legacy of brilliance intertwined with vulnerability, achievement entwined with dependency. The city glimpses the consequences, but the social machinery that sustained the powder expectation, discretion, and cultural reward persists. And so the fog lifts, revealing both clarity and shadow. The powder that once symbolized mastery now reflects limitation. Victorian society, for all its progress, refinement, and ambition, recognizes, if only partially, that brilliance sustained artificially carries a cost invisible until the veil is drawn back. The streets, once shrouded in literal and figurative haze, stand illuminated. The powder endures as both tool and cautionary tale, a reminder of ambition, dependency, and the fragile balance between appearance and reality.